Hello. Glad you're all here. It's a lovely, lovely Saturday night. I'm here in my Brooklyn apartment for a late night chat on YouTube Live. So much that we can discuss. Thank you so much for joining me. Plenty on the agenda. However, I do want to hear from you. Tell me what it is that you would like to discuss, and I will put it on my list. My list of things to discuss, I'll put it on here, and I'll get to it. See, someone called Space Communist says, "Good evening, Caleb." Well, I think the space program is great. Bird Worldists says, "Hi, King." Well, perhaps you want to go hiking. Arthur Porter says, I made it. Drunken Boatswan says, "Hey, comrade." Well, hey, comrade, right back at you, Mr. Boatswan Drunken. What else is on people's minds? I'm having a great time. So much we can talk to. Shout out to Dan Uko. Shout out to all the folks joining us. So much to talk about. So, someone wants me to talk about Yugoslavia. Someone wants me to talk about space communism. Someone wants me to talk about Comrade Corbyn, discuss the potential growth of socialism in the 20th century. Oh, I'll be talking about that. Someone wants to know about Hong Kong. I definitely will be talking about that. Someone's asking about the Democratic primary debates. I'll definitely be talking about that. It's all on the list. Great minds think alike. I am not drinking the legendary beverage that will not be named tonight. Why? Because I would like to sleep, and there is plenty of caffeine in my favorite beverage. But I've got a few things to talk about. But before we get started here, now is that time. Now is that time to cut and paste the link and post it on your Twitter, and post it on your YouTube, and bring more people into this conversation. Let's make this community bigger and better, right? Right? There's a lot of us here. We have a lot to say. It's a community here. We're not doing it the way other channels do it. We're doing our own thing here. Brandon Array shoots me a $1 super chat. Well, thank you, Brandon. I appreciate it. Shout out to you, as always. Are you going to talk about big tech companies that may get regulated? And yes, I am, Brandon. That is on my list of things to discuss for the evening. Especially the big tech monopolies and their recent campaign of censorship. I've got some specific things regarding that I want to get to. I would like to specifically address. So thank you, Brandon. I will definitely be discussing that point that you highlighted. But before we get into that, I'm asking you all to take this time to spread the word. Tell people that you're joining Caleb Maupin on social media. And for a live chat, I'm drinking water. Thank you for asking, Felicity Sharp. Someone wants to know what a Nazbol is. Is it actually real? Well, there's a topic. I'm sure no matter what I say on that topic, I will hear a lot of bad things in response to it, but might as well. That's on the list. Nikki Gallo sends me a hammer and sickle. Thomas Mitchlack says diet water that will not be named. Very, very humorous. Space Communist says Nazbol gang. Bird Worldist is asking about Strasserism. I'll address that when I address the Nazbol thing. Someone's asking questions about China. Plenty to talk about China. I think we got a full agenda here, folks. So if you haven't already done it, now is the time. Tweet this out, share on Facebook, and especially if there's a topic you and your friends want me to talk about, the way to get me to talk about it is dogpiling all your friends into the live, right? Get 20 of your friends in here all saying, "Caleb, talk about the Red Hot Chili Peppers. Caleb, talk about the Red Hot Chili Peppers. Caleb, talk about the Red Hot Chili Peppers." And if every single one of you is all piling in to ask me about a topic, there's no way I can avoid discussing it. So the bigger you make this audience, especially the more people like yourself who want me to talk about what you want me to talk about, the bigger it'll be. And don't talk about chili peppers, says Arthur Porter, and I won't. Don't worry. It was the first thing that came into my mind. Free association, as they say. But before we get to politics, I wanted to just mention that, I just saw that the British Film Institute has received a new donation of photographs of an actor by the name of Christopher Lee. Christopher Lee was a British actor who was he was in movies in Britain for over 70 years. He died on June 7th, 2015, roughly 4 years ago. And they recently opened up, some new unseen photographs of him that were donated to the British Film Institute. And I got to tell you, Christopher Lee was really something special, right? He played Dracula more than anyone else in the history of film. He was the Dracula. There was a British film production company that did low-budget horror films. And it was called Hammer Film Productions, Hammer Horror. And starting in the 50s, 60s, even up into the 70s, they made these horror films in Britain. They were very low budget. And Christopher Lee was their Dracula. He was their Frankenstein. Peter Cushing was their Van Helsing. He was their Dr. Frankenstein. And, these were good movies. I learned to appreciate them. There's a part of me that loves pulp, right? Because when you watched one of these movies, you were watching a story of a battle between good and evil. You knew that good was eventually going to win, evil was eventually going to lose. It took place in a kind of fictionalized retelling of Victorian England. It was supposed to be the 1800s, but it was retold through the viewpoint of the 1970s. All the guys had 70s shag haircuts, for example. It's Christopher Lee. He was the actor, and he has an amazing voice, or he had an amazing voice, a very deep, commanding voice. And you can actually find him on YouTube reading, like, Edgar Allan Poe's The Raven. Quoth the Raven, nevermore. It's just an amazing voice. One of the downsides of him playing Dracula was Dracula rarely spoke. He had very few lines in these movies. But Christopher Lee was something special, and actually, one thing is that Christopher Lee, when he was asked what role that he played in his life that was the most rewarding, he talked about having played the founder of Pakistan in a movie. And it was a movie that didn't get very widely viewed, but he portrayed the life of the founder of Pakistan. Now, those of you who watch more modern films will probably know him from Lord of the Rings. He was Lord Saruman the White. You will probably also know Christopher Lee from the late Star Wars movies, the more recent ones. He was Count Dooku. That was Christopher Lee, and so I thought I might mention him. I got into the Hammer horror movies when I was a high school student. My parents were rather strict about what they would and would not let me watch, and these 1960s, 70s horror films were something I could get through the parental censorship. And I loved them, and I watched them, and there was something about them. There were the old horror films from the 40s and 50s that were, campy and black and white, and, I liked the original Frankenstein, but the original Dracula was just a lot of talking, and they weren't really that thrilling. And then, at that point, I wasn't even really allowed to watch modern horror films, and now that I have, I don't particularly care for them. A lot of blood and gore, and, but something about those, you almost don't want to call them horror films. You want to call them gothic films, right? Films that were, they had vampires, they had mad scientists, but then they took place in the 1800s in some part of Eastern Europe, all played by British actors. You can call them gothic films more than anything. And there was something particularly beautiful about them. And at the time, they were wildly controversial. People thought they had too much blood and gore in them. People thought they were too sexual. But compared to what's out there nowadays, they were rather tame. And I particularly enjoyed them. And they were low-budget films, and there was something about them. They were like, kind of like pulp novels or something like that. And there was just something beautiful about them. So I thought I might just do that. I might just mention Christopher Lee. Now, I understand Christopher Lee was a conservative. Obviously I'm not a Tory. I don't support the British Conservative Party. I also understand he was a bit of an occult enthusiast. He had many blocks worth of occult literature. So a strange individual, but I just thought I might, mention Christopher Lee, the film actor who I admired his early work in my early years. I was touched to see that the British Film Institute got some new got some new photos of him, and I thought I would just start out by doing a tribute. Now, I've seen already in the comments a lot of things people want to talk out. Shout out to Jenny Lynn for joining us. Thank you for joining us. Glad you're with us. Shout out to Chips Philly, I believe is the name, the person with the Canadian logo. Shout out to you. I see you. So much we can talk about. Now, I know what is on everyone's mind is that attack on oil tankers, right? So mainstream U.S. media, along with U.S. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo and U.S. President Donald Trump, would have us believe that the Islamic Republic of Iran, which at this point has the United States doing its best to try and cut off their oil exports, right? We're telling the Islamic Republic of Iran, a country that's entire economy is centered around state-run oil companies, we're telling them, the United States, I shouldn't say we, but the U.S. government is trying to tell them that they shouldn't be able to export oil. They're doing everything they can to put pressure on countries around the world not to import their oil. So, while that's happening, right, we are to believe that Iran attacks 2 different oil tankers of people that are doing business with them, right? Don't buy it. Now, one of the oil tankers is owned by a Norwegian billionaire by the name of John Fredrickson. John Fredrickson is a Norwegian billionaire who actually goes back to the 1980s. This guy has been doing business with Iran since the time the Iraq-Iran war was going on. He is a longtime friend of the Iranians. And we're to believe that at a time where Iran is desperate to continue selling their oil on the international markets, they turn around and attack an oil tanker belonging to their oldest friend. Don't buy it. And the other oil tanker was a petrochemical tanker, and that one belonged to a Japanese company, and who happened to be in Tehran at the exact same time. At the exact same time this attack happened, Prime Minister of Japan, Shinzo Abe, was in Tehran, meeting with the supreme leader. He was sitting in a meeting with the supreme leader, and that is when Iran supposedly chose to attack a petrochemical tanker from Japan, along with the Norwegian guy's petrochemical tanker. On top of that, who was the first rescuers on the scene? Iranians. They immediately rescued the 44 sailors and took them to get medical treatment in the port of Bandar Abbas in southern Iran. Now, I have been to Bandar Abbas. Very interesting place. A lot of Chinese companies there, and that's a whole other story. But yes, I've been to Bandar Abbas. I was there in 2015, and it was Iranians. So you're telling me not only did Iran attack 2 of its oldest friends randomly, attack their oil tankers, no less, but on top of that, you're trying to tell me that after they then attacked 2 of their best friends, who they apparently wanted to harm for reasons that make no sense, they then rescued the sailors and rushed them to get medical treatment. Do you buy this? I don't buy it. I really think you shouldn't buy it. It makes absolutely no sense. And their proof that they have, they say they have proof. The proof is the Iranian rescue ship picking up what they say is a mine. And it's not a very clear video. It's a pretty, fuzzy video that they've got. But just because the Iranian rescue ship, picks up this mine, how does that prove Iran did it? If my house was on fire and the fire department came and put out the fire, they'd say, aha, it was the fire department that lit Caleb's house on fire. See, they put it out. I mean, that makes absolutely no sense. The logic that, oh, well, we have this video, and it's a little bit fuzzy, too, and, it's not exactly clear where this video came from, of Iranian rescuers, picking up a mine. That proves that Iran did it. On top of that, we have the owner of the Japanese petrochemical tanker saying that it was not hit by a mine, that it was gunfire, it was something launched from the air, it was not a torpedo, and it was not a mine. So a mine didn't even blow the whole thing up. So there's a lot here that just isn't adding up, the narrative that we're supposed to accept. But if you don't accept that, you're crazy. You're a tinfoil hat, right? The mainstream media, they pick one narrative of international events, they declare it to be true on the faultiest evidence, whether it's Syrian chemical weapons or whatever, and they pick this narrative. And if you don't go along with it, you're a conspiracy theorist. You're just like Alex Jones. You're ruining people's lives. You're tinfoil hatty. What was it? The Illuminati? Do you think the Illuminati did it, Caleb? Or do you think the reptile people did it? They have set this thing up where it's like a light switch. Either you believe what they say, or you're in conspiracy land, right? It's very, very dangerous. Either you accept, I mean, this is how they have framed it in mainstream media. Either you accept what they're saying, which doesn't add up at all. Why would Iran attack its two best friends at the time that it's trying to sell them oil? That doesn't make any sense, right? What the Pentagon says doesn't even match. They're saying it was a torpedo or a mine. That doesn't match what the people who were actually attacked, the Japanese company, says, right? So they're not even buying it. The people attacked don't even accept the event that the Pentagon is giving. But if you don't accept it, well, it was the lizard people, it was the reptiles, the Illuminati, you're a neo-Nazi Alex Jones guy, Ku Klux Klanner, oh, you should be outlawed, you should be banned from social media. It's a trap that they have set up. I mean, it's unbelievable how they have set this up. They have set it up. You can either be a true believer in what the mainstream media says, or you're crazy. Well, I tend to think that rational criticism of the prevailing narrative is possible. And if you look throughout the history of the 20th century, rational criticism of the mainstream narrative is something that most societies have tolerated. Even societies we deem to be authoritarian generally tolerate rational criticism of the mainstream narrative. But the mainstream media in the United States has set up this trap where either you accept their version of events verbatim, or you're a lunatic. And that's a very, very dangerous trap. I mean, there's that whole thing, people talk about Cass Sunstein and cognitive infiltration, and it seems like it's worked out pretty well. They've created this dichotomy that is very, very, very dangerous, right? I don't accept the Mike Pompeo story of Iran attacking its two best friends for absolutely no reason. I don't buy it. I just don't buy it. However, I don't think it was the Illuminati or the lizard people. In fact, I say I don't know what happened. I don't know what happened. I certainly was not in the Gulf of Oman on Thursday. I wasn't there. I don't know what happened. I don't think Mike Pompeo knows either. Right? I think that the story that is being put forward, I think that the conspiracy theory being put forward by Mike Pompeo that Iran, for no logical reason at all, attacked two of its loyalist friends, its two big business partners at like the least opportune time. I don't think Mike Pompeo's conspiracy theory about those events is valid. Right? That's all I'm saying here. I'm not saying that it was done by anybody. I'm not blaming anybody because I don't have any facts to blame anybody for. What I do have is a critique of the actual story. I'm doing what journalists are supposed to do. I am questioning the narrative that are being put forward by the leaders. That's supposed to be, in theory, the job of a journalist. You're supposed to ask tough questions to those in power. You're supposed to hold those in power accountable. And I am telling you that as someone who has been to Iran, as someone who has been on ships in the Gulf of Aden and in the Persian Gulf, and I am telling you, I don't buy it. Right? I don't buy it. Not buying it. Not going to do it. Not buying it. And again, if you talk to mainstream media, right, I'm the same as Alex Jones. That's dangerous. That is a dangerous precedent that they have set up. And worse than that, as this Brian fellow was asking me about, now these people, not only do they get, do you get shut down, not only do you get accused of being a crazy conspiracy theorist, they actually close down your YouTube channel. They ban you from Twitter. I mean, it's a scary, scary precedent we've got here, right? I mean, if you read some of these things, these videos that are getting taken down, if they accuse you of being hateful, right? If you make a, quote, hateful video, then they can take it down. If you make a video questioning the narrative of tragic events, they can take it down. Using that logic, all kinds of stuff could be banned, right? I mean, and people say, oh, well, that's Caleb, they're only doing it against these fascists, against these right-wing Trump-supporting fascists. Well, I would beg to differ, folks. Minister Louis Farrakhan, who is one of the most important black leaders, right? I mean, this is the guy who organized the Million Man March, right? Minister Louis Farrakhan, who leads the Nation of Islam, the Nation of Islam, a very prominent African American religious group, the publishers of the Final Call. This is not one isolated guy. Minister Louis Farrakhan is quite an icon in U.S. politics, right? If you've ever heard of the Million Man March, if you've ever heard of, the Nation of Islam, Elijah Muhammad, Malcolm X, this guy was part of all of that, right? And they have banned him from Facebook. They have banned him from Twitter. They have shut down Minister Louis Farrakhan. And I'm not going to sit here and go through everything Louis Farrakhan said and say, well, he had the right to say this. That's not the game I'm here to play, right? I am not a member of the Nation of Islam. I, as folks know, I am a Christian. I do not have their worldview, and they wouldn't want me to, right? It's an African American black nationalist thing. They don't even want me to agree with them, and that's fine. But we're shutting down one of the most well-known, prominent, important black leaders in the United States. That's very, very, very scary, right? It's very, very scary. But it's just the tip of the iceberg, and I am disturbed when I see leftists who cheer for this. When I see leftists supporting this kind of thing, it's very, very, very disturbing, my goodness, right? Allen Ginsberg, the poet, the beatnik poet, openly advocated pedophilia. Look it up, right? Allen Ginsberg, the beatnik poet, I saw the best minds of my generation destroyed by madness, starving, hysterical, naked. That guy, right? That poet, right? Well, no one talks about it. People like to talk about his poetry, but people don't talk about the fact that in the 70s and in the 80s, he was a member of NAMBLA. He was advocating child rape. This man actually advocated the rape of young boys and openly said he did not believe there was anything wrong with it. But, are we going to ban Allen Ginsberg's poetry? Like, if I held up a copy of Allen Ginsberg's poetry, would they ban this video? Of course not, right? He's considered, he was a poet, he was an iconic literary figure, and he was all of that. He was a very skilled poet. He was an iconic literary figure. But, he said some things that society doesn't approve of, and we kind of forgive him for it, right? And he never acted, apparently. There's no proof that he ever did any pedophilic things, but... he was pretty disgusting, in a lot of ways, but, he's still upheld as a literary figure. So if Allen Ginsberg's work and Allen Ginsberg foundations and all of that can be on social media, why is Minister Louis Farrakhan, one of the most important black leaders, not allowed on social media, right? You cannot find anything where Minister Louis Farrakhan has advocated child rape. He's never done anything remotely near that. Where do you draw the line? The line gets drawn very, very selectively, right? And that must absolutely be said. The line gets drawn when rich and powerful forces want it drawn, and it doesn't get drawn when other forces don't get it drawn. Pat Buchanan, for example, right? Pat Buchanan is a right-wing Republican commentator, right? I think he was a speechwriter for Nixon back in the day. He ran on the Reform Party ticket in the 2000 election. Conservative, right-winger. He calls himself a paleo-conservative. He's, more alt-right, I guess you could say, but before alt-right was a thing. He's more libertarian-ish. He favors kind of populist trade policies. In fact, long before Donald Trump, Pat Buchanan was advocating building a border wall. That was actually the platform that he ran for president in 2000 on the Reform Party ticket. Pat Buchanan, right? Read what Pat Buchanan has said about Hitler, right? Pat Buchanan has written some pretty atrocious stuff about Hitler, right? Read some stuff that he's written about the anniversary of the Second World War starting and all of that. He upholds the America First grouping that was this kind of mildly pro-sympathetic, pro-Nazi, group that was sympathetic kind of in the United States. And he's written all kinds of things about the origins of the Second World War that sound like he's really bending over backwards to give Hitler the benefit of the doubt. Now, obviously the guy's not a Nazi, but now, should Pat Buchanan be banned from social media? Should he? He's not only is he on social media, he's on MSNBC as one of their main Republican talking heads. Again, you know what I'm saying? Sometimes these standards get applied, other times they do not, right? I'm telling you, right? There are many examples you can go down of people that are tolerated people that are part of the tolerated discourse who have said ugly, awful things, done ugly, awful, horrendous things, but they're in with the leadership of this country, they're in with the rich and powerful, and nothing happens to them. And there are plenty of people, who, for whatever reason, they get locked out, and there's, these are people that disagree with them or agree with them. You can say they've said things you don't agree with. You don't have to defend what they said. But should we really be pretending the Million Man March didn't happen? Give me a break here. Give me a break. So I've given you my speech on that. And before I finish that off, I want to just say, and I've mentioned it here before, but Jonah Goldberg, who is, not an obscure figure at all. He is the editor of National Review. Jonah Goldberg wrote an article earlier this year, I believe, in which he said that the name of his article was Karl Marx's Jew-Hating Conspiracy Theory. And if you read it, he says that all anti-capitalism is anti-Semitic. If you disagree with capitalism, capitalist is code for Jew. That's what he says in the article. He says that, right? And he's not the only one making this argument. If you listen to those in the Labour Party who are turning against the leader of the Labour Party in Britain, Jeremy Corbyn, they're making similar arguments. They're making statements to the effect of, yes, criticizing capitalism, we all know it's anti-Semitic. So now, on that basis, they could ban any socialist party, any socialist Twitter group, Bernie Sanders, for goodness sakes. They could ban anyone who advocates socialism. They could ban any of you who are watching this now, who advocate socialism, using YouTube's vague, you want to talk about vague, really, really vague rules, right? They could ban anyone who criticizes capitalism because, according to Jonah Goldberg, the editor of National Review magazine, one of the most widely circulated conservative right-wing magazines in the United States, according to him, criticizing capitalism is anti-Semitic, right? Even though Karl Marx was Jewish himself, criticizing capitalism is anti-Semitic. So there you go, right? That's the way things are going here, right? We've gotten to the point that if your speech offends someone, right? That if your speech offends someone, therefore it's okay to silence you. And I don't agree with that. I don't agree with that precedent. And I urge people that are in the far left, to think for a moment. Just think for a moment, right? The Battle of Cable Street, and there's a whole history, the workers' militia, but think about this for a moment, right? This isn't a matter of, should people defend themselves when they're being attacked? This is a matter of, should we grant Silicon Valley monopolists, right? The Silicon Valley elite, should we grant them the authority to shut down people who have not broken the law, to shut them down on the basis of what they say? Should we do that or not? That's basically the question we're having here. And I've got to say, no, I have got to say, I am not for tech censorship, right? It's one thing to argue and debate and disagree with people on the right, but it is something very, very different to, grant the power to the very forces that people on the left are supposed to be opposed to, right? The Wall Street monopolists, the Silicon Valley elite, the Pentagon, the most powerful forces. And the most powerful forces, are supposed to be the ones that we're granting the authority to silence people. They've already come for Minister Louis Farrakhan, and it's a scary time, folks. I don't like seeing leftists cheering for tech censorship. We should all be very, very worried about tech censorship because it's a big problem, and that must be said. Now, a lot of people, have asked me to talk about things. I know Mason, a young man named Mason, asked me if I would talk about the situation in India and the communist movement in India. And that's something I'd like to talk about, actually, because, at this point, so there's a couple ways to come at this. Well, first of all, we got Modi, right, who is from the right-wing Hindu nationalist party in India. He's a right-winger, and he's a nationalist. But at the same time, he's a little he's not as pro-USA as some previous leaders in India. And folks will notice that the Obama administration didn't particularly care for Modi very much, and that he was part of the BRICS, and that he's got very good relations with Russia, and off and on good relations with China. And at this point, I understand India is talking about putting some tariffs on American products, right? And so, for the longest time, the USA had its foot in both India and Pakistan. And those two countries, obviously, long history there. There's the disputed Kashmir territory. They don't like each other. Long history there. And the USA kind of tried to play both sides. But now, China and Pakistan are like this. And the China-Pakistan economic corridor is like one of the most important and amazing projects going on right now. And it started, by the way, back during the Mao era, right? In 1966, Mao Zedong and the Chinese government started a relationship with, at that point, I believe it was a military government in Pakistan, and they built one of the biggest highways in the entire world, the China-Pakistan Friendship Highway. Huge highway that they built, and it's elevated. It's like over mountains. It's just an amazing infrastructure project that the Chinese government and the Pakistani government built in 1966. Well, in the last 2-3 years, the China-Pakistan economic corridor has boomed. Right? China has been pouring in aid and development into Pakistan, building infrastructure. And why are they doing this? Why are they helping build airports and hospitals and highways and trains in Pakistan? Why are they investing? Because they want to stop terrorism, right? China is concerned about the drug trade, and they're concerned about terrorism. And Pakistan's, its mountainous parts that are up by Afghanistan, it's a breeding ground for Al-Qaeda. That's a breeding ground for the heroin trade. And the way to bring stability to Central Asia is with economic development. If you can give people opportunity and raise them out of poverty, right? If you can do that, they're less likely to join Al-Qaeda and terrorist groups. They're less likely to be involved in the heroin trade. So China is trying to develop Pakistan. So because China and Pakistan are very close, the Trump administration has doubled down, and they are all for Modi, right? I mean, because Trump accused Pakistan of funding terrorism, and there's this whole thing. So now it's Imran Khan and Pakistan are getting closer to President Xi and the People's Republic of China, very close, amazing economic corridor project going on. So you got that happening. So now you've got the United States doubling down, saying that they Modi's their guy. But you'll notice every so often, they don't like Modi, right? Modi's putting tariffs on U.S. products, right? Modi has regulated the banking sector in ways that the Wall Street Journal and the U.S. press were clearly not happy about. Modi's a nationalist. And so it's kind of an interesting situation there. However, Modi seems to be establishing ties with the United States. So in India, you see a surge of, some of these communist groups are growing and gaining influence, right? And they seem to be blocking with the forces that don't like Modi. And it's an interesting situation there. And you have, first of all, you have the Communist Party of India, Marxist. Right? That's not to be confused with what was the official Communist Party of India during the Soviet years. But there's the Communist Party of India, parenthesis, Marxist. And that was a pro-China group. They went into electoral politics, and they have a very strong foothold in regional governments. They have quite a bit of power. They have quite a few elected seats. It's quite a powerful political party. I was able to meet with members of that political party when I was in Ecuador for the 2013 World Festival of Youth and Students. I was also able to meet with them once again in 2017 when I was in Sochi in Russia for the World Festival of Youth and Students. I met with members of their youth organization. It was great. I remember we went to a workshop with the Vietnamese Ho Chi Minh Communist Youth Union, and the members of the Communist Party of India Marxist were leading the crowd and chanting what was at that point the chant in India: "Your name, my name, Vietnam, Vietnam. Your name, my name, Vietnam, Vietnam." I mean, great bunch of folks. And they're a serious political party. Now, they are not the official Communist Party of India. They're the Communist Party of India Marxist, which was a pro-China group that eventually went into the government. And they have a variety of positions, and they have different relations with different groups around the world. That's the Communist Party of India Marxist. And then in India, you also have another group that I actually, when I was more active, I actually, when they would visit the United States, I would sit down and get to know them, and that's called the Socialist Unity Center of India, SUSI. And they follow an ideological guy named Shibdas Ghosh. And they were also a pro-China group that emerged, and they have seats in local government. And they're they're also a pro-China group, but they were critical of China somewhat, and they're quite an interesting organization as well. And they have whole regions and neighborhoods they control in urban areas. They're close with the labor movement. The Socialist Unity Center of India, Communist, I believe, is the full name of it. And then that brings me to the Naxals. Okay, and I'm gonna get flack for saying this, but okay, there's a lot of young people on the internet. They get excited about international politics, and they love the Naxals in India. Well, 40, 50 years ago, when, the Naxals were a new political current that was, organizing peasants to fight their landlords, maybe that made a little bit of sense. To admire the Naxals now is a deeply misguided position, right? I mean, the Naxals, at this point, I believe there are many, many different parties. Someone told me something like 51 different Naxal parties in India. I mean, and a lot of what they do is robbing people. People try to pass through these areas. They rob them at gunpoint and take their stuff. Uh, you know, um, and they haven't really made very much progress in the last 30, 40 years. They control very, very, very little bits of territory. They're fractured and divided. And the main difference I would have with the Naxals is that India has one of the biggest working classes in the world, right? The most industrial workers in the world of any country is China. Second is India. India has the second largest industrial working class in the world. They've got factories, they got steel mills, right? And the Communist Party of India, Marxist, is working with that big working class and trying to organize them to fight for justice. The Socialist Unity Center of India, Communist, is working with that industrial working class, fighting for justice. And the Naxals say that the factory workers, this huge industrial working class of India, they're not interested, right? They're for the peasantry, right? Which again, 50 years ago made sense. But they're trying to recreate the 1930s Mao People's War of China or something. It's very, very weird. The Naxals have no interest in organizing the industrial working class like the different communist groups are doing, and they're focused on the peasantry. And to do that in India at this time, when you have a huge industrial working class, doesn't make sense. And that there's a lot of young people who really fetishize armed struggle, right? They just, anybody around the world, they get on Wikipedia and they look, where are there communists with guns? And they like them because they're communists and they have guns. Well, I'm telling you that, at this point, the folks that are still doing the Naxal thing in India are not where it's at, right? They're not making a revolution, right? They're not going to, create socialism in India. I'm just telling you that, right? If you are a Marxist in India and you have no interest in organizing a huge industrial working class, and you're focused on trying to build peasant communes in the countryside and recreate the 1930s People's War of Mao, you're out of touch. That must be said. And I mean, if the Naxals were to make great gains, that would be, if they were to get themselves together and they were actually, able to create some liberated territory, and they were actually fighting for the rights of peasants, and hypothetically, one could think of a situation where what they were doing might be good, but at this point, they're in the jungle robbing people, and, come on. That's not where the energy for socialism in India is at. It is not with the Naxals. What they're doing is it seems like criminal activity to a lot of people who observe it. And I know people are going to give me flack for saying it, but I'm just telling you, that there's a lot of Marxism in India. There are a lot of communist groups there that have a lot of influence, and the Naxals, not where it's at. And that brings me to a point I wanted to make. And I wanted to have a conversation about this because, there's a lot of talk about this. And I get accused, people take one thing that I say and they distort it. And then people take another thing that I say and they distort it another way. So, I'll just point blank ask a question. Can you vote in socialism? Can you vote in socialism? Can you vote in socialism? Can you vote socialism into being? No. No, you cannot. However, does that mean that I advocate a violent revolution? No. No, I do not. And that's where it gets complicated, right? Things aren't that simple. There's a lot of people who say, when I say that it is wrong and is incorrect for Marxists to go around advocating a violent revolution, people say to me, Caleb says we can vote in socialism. No. And then there are people that say, well, Caleb, when you say we can't vote in socialism, you're advocating a violent revolution. No. 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 The actual science of Marxism is not as simple as all of that. Can you vote in socialism? No, you cannot. Socialism is a society coming together and taking control of the major centers of economic power, the banks, factories, and industries, the major natural resources, the major sources of energy, all the centers of the economy, all the centers of economic power being controlled by society and functioning to work in the benefit of society. If you think that that could come into being as the result of a bunch of people going to the polls and clicking for one candidate, that's delusional. Could never happen, right? If you think that big of a change, if that big of a transformation of society, of all the major centers of economic power going from the hands of private capitalists to being controlled by society, if you think something that dramatic, something that big, right, going from one economic system to another, the means of production changing hands, changing how they operate, if you think that could happen simply as a result of people going to the polls and clicking for one candidate, that's an illusion, right? Right? Socialism has always been the result of major mobilizations of the people, millions of people in motion, active. And, let me add, that when millions of people are in motion, organizing, resisting, building up power, building community assemblies, Soviets, Bolivarian circles, workers' councils, getting somebody elected is very, very helpful, right? It's very, very helpful. So yes, socialists should be voting. Yes, socialists should be participating in the electoral politics. They should be involved in voting, running candidates, participating, yes, but that will not create socialism. But does that mean you advocate a violent revolution? No, right? Left adventurism, punchism, Blanquism, that is something that every serious revolutionary has rejected. Violence is not something that serious organizers ever would want to see, right? Working class people live with violence in their lives. I mean, violence is a horror of working class life in the United States. It's working class people that are sent to fight in the wars, for goodness sakes. There's, police brutality. There's, domestic violence in working class communities. There is violence is something that working class people, the broad masses of people of society, would like to move away from and like to get away from. And they turn to socialism to get away from violence. It's middle class, ultra-left adventurers, children, right, who want to feel like they're heroes. They glorify violence, right? They feel like violence is some really exciting thing. I'm going to be a hero. I'm going to be Che Guevara. I'm going to go. That's not working class, right? Violent revolutions have happened in history, but they happen only as a result of no other option being available to the people, and of violence and terror and extremism coming down on the working class as they try to organize peacefully. And at that point, they have no choice but to defend themselves and end the violence. Socialist revolutions have always been an act of self-defense, right? Socialist revolutions are not the result of voting for one candidate or other. However, having people in office who believe in socialism, would move the government in a socialist way, would be aligned with a mass movement, is a good thing. So I'm not saying don't vote. However, I'm saying that socialism doesn't come about as a result of people going to the ballot box and punching one candidate or other. But that does not mean that one should advocate extreme violence and adventurism and chaos, and that's not the case either. Socialism comes about as a result of people being brought into the political process, ordinary people being mobilized to defend their communities, to demand jobs and housing and health care, taking care of each other. That's primarily what it was. You look at the 1930s, the unemployment councils that were existing in this city and other parts of the country, the labor unions. I mean, the Communist Party was an organization that helped hungry people eat. That was what the Communist Party of the United States did in the 1930s. It helped hungry people eat. When people were hungry and starving, it would feed them, and it would lead them to march to City Hall and demand that their elected officials feed them as well. The Communist Party, their slogan that they organized for in the early part of the 1930s was "Fight or Starve," right? And if you look at these communists in places like India that I just mentioned, the Socialist Unity Center of India, Communist, the Communist Party of India, Marxist, those folks do that. They organize on a community level. They care for people. They provide services to people. And at the same time that they're doing that, they provide them with ideology, right? They're explaining to them why they are hungry. They're explaining the problem of capitalism, and they're bringing them into an organization that seeks to transform all of society and move toward a socialist society, right? And that is the work of genuine Marxists and genuine communists. That's the work that they do. They care for people. They teach people how to fight for their own interests. They feed people, and they build community, and they build a mass movement, and they run for office, and they get elected, and they participate in elections, but the ultimate goal is to transform all of society. Elections are simply a means to an end, right? But they don't engage in terrorism and violence and ultra-left adventurism, right? That's the kind of thing that serious revolutionaries have always avoided. That's infantile. I think that the Black Panthers, what they did with their free breakfast program was purely amazing stuff. And there's a reason that J. Edgar Hoover, the FBI director, said that the Black Panthers' greatest threat to the internal security of the United States was the Black Panthers' free breakfast program. Why? Because there were kids all over urban centers in the United States, African-American young people, who were hungry, and they fed them. And they fed them at the same time they gave them revolutionary ideology, and they read to them from Chairman Mao's Little Red Book, and they talked to them about Marxism, Leninism, and that was a threat, right? People acting crazy and all of that, that's not a threat, right? And that's what's really, really missing. I've often said that if there's any hope for socialism in the United States, they need to get out of the movement and get to the masses. I am tired. I am so tired of the protest cage, right? And that seems to be what so many of these socialist groups, not to name names, that's what they aspire to be. King of the protest cage, right? If anyone wants to come to the rally, they're going to have to come through us because we got the permit and we set up the stage and we have marshals here and it's our rally. I mean, it's the number of people in the United States that attend communist and socialist rallies is very, 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 very small, right? So if you aspire to be king of the protest cage, you are aspiring to nothing. At this point, there are millions of Americans who are worried about paying their bills, who have seen their lives destroyed by the low-wage economy. Somebody mentioned Andrew Yang, and I'm not endorsing any candidate, and I certainly don't agree with some of the things the man has said. But when he talks about what's coming, right, the other shoe dropping with automation, that's heavy stuff, right? I mean, think about it. We're not that far away from self-driving cars. So think about that. Self-driving cars. We're not that far away from it, I mean, think about what's happening to all the stores as Amazon, starts to replace them. I mean, it is technology that is eliminating jobs, right? The tech revolution is eliminating jobs. What this man predicted in his book Capital, about the industrial worker competing with machines has taken off to such an extreme level that we're at the point where there are going to be millions of people that are outcast and starving. And it's going to happen gradually. It's not going to be like overnight. But they have removed, it used to be, in this book, Marx describes workers as appendages to machines. Well, now we have machines with no appendages, right? This is big. This is very, very big. And the only way out of this, ultimately, the only way to end the contradiction of capitalism, to end this reality of eliminating labor with technology, of the crisis of overproduction that ensues from it, the only way to get out of this is for the workers to seize control of the means of production, for the banks, factories, and industries to operate rationally, right, and not according to profits. And Andrew Yang does not advocate that, right? He advocates universal basic income. He has some kind of technocratic ideas, but he's not a socialist. And he knows the actual definition of socialism. He's very clear that he's not a socialist. I'm not a Yang supporter. I think a lot of what he says is interesting. I have a lot of questions. There's a lot of things about universal basic income that I think are potentially dangerous. I said that in a video that was widely circulated that I made. Shout out to Elio Mani, by the way. Glad you're joining us. Always a pleasure to have you here. Now, earlier, Ramiro, my friend of mine, Ramiro, said he did not get any notification of this live. So those of you who are watching now, if you're not subscribed, subscribe. And if you have subscribed, go down and you'll see that bell. There's like a bell-shaped thing next to the subscribe button. Click on that. You want to get notifications of my videos, right? Click on that bell button so that you're always here and joining the live. I see there's quite a few of us joining. We're having a great time. I'm talking about socialism and voting and overproduction and capitalism and all kinds of stuff. The inundation says smash the bell button. Please do, because we're doing some exciting stuff here. You know, the Ben Shapiro videos. I don't know if folks saw... Like last week, I made a video ripping Ben Shapiro to shreds. And then just yesterday, I made a video criticizing, or not yesterday, 2 days ago, I made a video criticizing Ben Shapiro's fans. And, you know, they got a lot of views. And, you know, you wonder, is it worth doing? Is it really worth doing these kind of things? But hey, why not, right? You know, I mean, Ben Shapiro, a lot of people listen to him. A lot of people listen to him. And the other thing is, you know, sure, I got a lot of hate from the Ben Shapiro fans, but I wasn't expecting them to like me. But I got a lot of love from a lot of different places. A lot of people, like there was a comment under my video, some person said, "Where have you been all my life? I've been waiting for someone to take down Ben Shapiro so epically." There were people from all kinds of different walks of life that were sharing that video of me criticizing Ben Shapiro. It was weird. There were teenage kids sharing it. There were people in the African-American community sharing it. There were old retired auto workers sharing the video. I saw that Ajamu Baraka, right, who was the Green Party vice presidential candidate of Jill Stein, he actually shared my video on Facebook. He shared the me criticizing Ben Shapiro video. I mean, it created a sensation, right? So, hey, I mean, maybe you should pay attention to these people, right? Maybe you should do it, right? I mean, look, I listen to these guys mainly because they talk about socialism. I mean, every other word out of these people's mouth is socialist, communist, Marxist, and more people listen to them than listen to, you know, most of the people that are advocating socialism. So, you know, I listen to what they say and I disagree with it. And every so often I'll make a video criticizing them. And I've noticed it's interesting. One guy I particularly don't care for is Dinesh D'Souza. I don't like that guy at all. I noticed, though, that if I make a video criticizing Dinesh D'Souza, nobody cares, right? Dinesh D'Souza's fans, like, Dinesh D'Souza is an infomercial on Rush Limbaugh, right? Everyone knows who Rush Limbaugh is. But Dinesh D'Souza is an infomercial. He's a book infomercial. If you really like Rush Limbaugh, you should read this new book by Dinesh D'Souza about why Hitler was a Marxist. You know, Dinesh D'Souza, he's not somebody people are following. Ben Shapiro, he's a young guy. I don't know, is he older than me, younger than me? I think he's slightly older than me, but he's a young guy, and he does this kind of intellectual thing where he's trying to debate people and all of that, and so he has somewhat of a following. And I've made videos about him before. And this latest video I made criticizing Ben Shapiro touched a nerve. I saw that it wasn't just on my channel. It was on like some InfoWars guy. You know, he cut the video and he was sharing it on his channel. And, you know, all kinds of people liked me criticizing Ben Shapiro. Well, I'll keep doing it. And I criticized his fans, and I continue. Like every time I look on my phone, goodness gracious, there's another comment on there of somebody going, yes, thank you for owning Ben Shapiro. Or another Ben Shapiro can going, oh, that's not right, you're stupid. You know what I mean? So it's touched a nerve. I mean, this video just won't stop. Every time I look at my phone, I've got another comment on this Ben Shapiro thing. So, hey, and the funny thing is, I would love to debate Ben Shapiro. Now, what I would not like, and I'll emphasize this, I am not interested in going to one of Ben Shapiro's events, in the audience, walking up to the microphone, while the people hold the microphone, and saying, Ben, there's this thing you say, and then they pull the microphone away, and then he proceeds to insult your clothing, and no, not going to do that. I'm interested in a real debate with Ben Shapiro. Put me on a stage with Ben. Give me a podium with Ben. Put the whole thing live streamed on the internet. Give me equal time with Ben Shapiro, and you will get a performance. And the thing is, I don't think that'll ever happen. And the reason that a debate between me and Ben Shapiro would not ever happen is because I am not a college liberal. Right? I am not a college liberal. I am not the kind of thing that Ben Shapiro loves to yell at. I'm not the kind of thing that Ben Shapiro's fans are annoyed by either. I'm the kind of thing that keeps Ben Shapiro and Dinesh D'Souza up late at night. I'm the real deal, right? I'm not interested in getting on a stage with Ben Shapiro and calling him racist, which, I mean, you can look at some of the comments he's made, that there's certainly a strong case there, but that's not what I would do. I'm not interested in getting on the stage and yelling at Ben Shapiro for being intolerant, for breaking the rules on the college campuses. If I were on the stage with Ben Shapiro, I would defend the legacy of socialism. And I would not let him get away with, socialism failed everywhere it's ever been tried and killed a bajillion, gamillion people. Oh, no. I am the kind of thing that keeps them awake at night. They're not afraid. They are not afraid of people who think that that Norway and Sweden are great examples of socialism, and we need to tax the rich $1 more to give everyone a free donut. They're not afraid of those folks. They're not afraid of young people who take gender and race studies and learn 2 or 3 buzzwords that they can yell at their parents with. Oh no! Oh no! No no! No, the Ben Shapiro folks, I'm the kind of thing they're afraid of. I'll tell you that much. And that's why I don't think a debate like that will happen. But hey, if it would, that would be even better, right? I mean, there you go. And who knows, right? I mean, maybe it would be good for Ben too, right? I mean, maybe it would be an interesting turn of events to see him go up against something that he hasn't gone up against before, right? Who knows? I've been to Iran and all of that. International media. Maybe it would be good for him to debate me. Who knows? We'll see. I doubt I'll get a response from Ben. But all these people in the comments, oh, you're a coward for not debating Ben. I would love to debate Ben. Oh, I would love to debate Ben Shapiro. That would be fun. But we got plenty of other things to talk about. So many things we could talk about. Hong Kong is on people's minds, is it not? Hong Kong is on people's minds. So the rich kids of Hong Kong have gone out to protest against the Chinese Communist Party. They have been displaying very largely the flag, the provincial flag of the Chinese of Hong Kong when it was a British protectorate, that has the Union Jack in the corner of it. There's even been signs praising the Queen of England, right? This is pretty blatant. And what no one is ever talking about, American media certainly is not talking about, is that average people in Hong Kong are not interested. Working class people in Hong Kong who have seen their living standards rise because of the Communist Party are not interested in these protests. These protests are the rich kids of Hong Kong. This is the real housewives of come on. This is the children of the rich, right? These are the rich kids of Hong Kong who are convinced that if only the Communist Party were overthrown, they would be able to live like the rich kids of Williamsburg, like the rich kids of London, and the Chinese Communist Party gets in their way, right? That they could have 3 or 4 Bentleys and expensive cars. They could be rich and powerful like the rich and powerful people in Western countries, but that darn Chinese Communist Party is getting in their way, and they can't be uber, super duper wealthy. They want to be like the West. They think that it's this weird thing I've noticed with wealthy people who sympathize with imperialist countries. They have this illusion that if an anti-imperialist regime is overthrown, then their country will become like the country that overthrows their government, right? When I was in the northern part of Tehran, I talked to a lot of wealthy young Iranians who were convinced that if the USA were to overthrow the Iranian government, then then Iran would become the USA, right? And I told them, no, it doesn't really work that way. If you look at Iraq, Iraq did not become rich like the United States. Look at Libya. Libya did not become rich like the United States. Look at Syria lately, as the USA has been escalating its regime change efforts that's been going on, the civil war. It's this weird delusion they have. Well, if Britain and the United States overthrow the Chinese Communist Party in Hong Kong, then Hong Kong will turn into Britain and the United States. Doesn't work that way at all. That is not how it works. Doesn't work that way at all. And it's this illusion that these folks have, but they've lived lives of luxury, and they see how people in other Western countries live in lives of luxury as well, and they don't understand why they have a government that restricts and controls the wealthy and doesn't just let them do whatever they want, like in the West, right? In the West, the corporations control the government. In China, the government controls the corporations, and there is a layer of very wealthy people not just in Hong Kong, but in all of China. There's a strata that I'm sure resents that on some level. They would like to have the government work for the corporations, not have to have even the rich people live under the control of the government, right? And that's a reality. And that's not to say that there aren't some legit grievances, right? Corruption is a big problem in Hong Kong. Many people have talked about the problem of corruption. And there may be some things these protesters that are saying. I'm sure there are some things that they're saying that are legit. But overall, as they're waving the flags of the Union Jack and the British Empire, they're displaying signs, talking about how great British colonialism is. Yeah, there you go. Not having it. Not having it. I don't know if folks saw, but the anniversary of the Tiananmen stuff, happened, and I gave an interview about it. I did an interview, and, look, folks, back in 1989, there was definitely a protest going on, and it was definitely shut down. But the narrative that we have gotten from Western media about it for the last, since it happened practically, that the Chinese Communist Party went in there and killed everyone in a violent fit of rage, that narrative is not what has been said by people that were there, right? And I go over that in great detail in the interview. And I talk about it. And now we've got articles from NBC. We've got Nicholas Kristof from the New York Times. We've got, BBC reporters that were on the scene. We've got the Chilean diplomatic cables they sent to the United States. There was a lot of death in the aftermath of the Tiananmen Square protests, absolutely. But the violence and killing happened outside of the square. The students dispersed pretty peacefully. It wasn't a big epic massacre in the square. There was violence elsewhere, and there was violence, there were soldiers that were dying too. There were snipers on rooftops. There was, people lit on fire. There was a lot of violence in 1989 in Beijing. But the idea that the students were just there singing Kumbaya in the square peacefully, and then they all got run over with tanks, that's just not factual. That's not what happened, according to a number of observers. And Now, space communist is saying the intergalactic working class shall be the human race, says space communist. Well, there you go. I don't know what do you say to that? I know the New York Times did a whole thing about we need space communism and all of that, and it was cute, and they were probably alluding to some of this Andrew Yang critique of automation and technology and all of that, and it was cute, but I mean, and I'm for the space program. I think the space program is amazing, right? That's one of the great things the Soviet Union invented, space travel, right? I mean, the space program here in the USA, I think was a good thing. I mean, unfortunately, it was pretty closely tied in with the military and all that, but it was still a good thing. I mean, a lot of scientific breakthroughs, a lot of new technology. I'm for the space program. I think the space program is A-OK, right? Do you think China's economy needs more workers' control? Is being asked to me by Cherry Phillips, I believe is the name. I think that China is doing its best, and that there are a lot of contradictions in China right now. I know, President Xi is doing a lot to erode the problem of corruption. I know that there's a big effort to reassert, the ideology of the Chinese Communist Party. And push not only Marxism-Leninism, Mao Zedong thought, Deng Xiaoping theory, but also Xi Jinping's thoughts that have been added to the Constitution and the new ideological breakthroughs that President Xi is making. I also know that at this point, there is a huge effort by the United States to wreck their economy, right? And that they are facing this trade war fomented by the Trump administration. And they're specifically singling out Huawei, which is the biggest telecommunications manufacturer in the entire world. It's one of the crowning achievements of Deng Xiaoping. I mean, Deng Xiaoping worked to help Huawei come into being. It's a huge state-controlled mega corporation. It's technically a cooperative under Chinese law. And the USA has just, the U.S. government officials have just, they put their crosshairs on Huawei and they want it destroyed. And I was very happy to see that Spain, right? Spain has decided to sign up for a new 5G program with Huawei. And they basically said, oh yeah, the USA says no one should ever work with Huawei. Right? And Spain is going ahead with Huawei. I think that's a great thing. And I've said it before. I'm just going to repeat myself. I can't testify that they're the best phones ever, Jenny Lynn. I can't say that, but they're good phones. They have better battery life than the iPhone I'm doing this on right now. And they're good phones. They're very high quality. But on top of that, I just want to say that Huawei, the argument against them is that, high-ranking people in Huawei have ties to the Chinese military. So therefore, no one should ever do business with Huawei because it's tied to the Chinese military. That argument is so ridiculous. Do you think people at Verizon have nothing to do with the American military? Do you think people at AT&T have nothing to do with the American military? Did you not see what Edward Snowden has revealed about how all of these big American telecom companies have a relationship with the NSA and have a back door with American intelligence agencies? Have we not heard already that the USA was actually spying on diplomatic missions, UN missions? It was spying on all of them, right? Violating the UN treaty completely, right? Did you not see that? Has anyone not seen? I mean, on that basis, if having ties to a country's military or intel agencies with grounds for banning a tech company, nobody should ever buy a Verizon phone again, an AT&T. I mean, this is ridiculous. An iPhone, right? Apple, you think Apple, nothing, no relationship between Apple and the Chinese government. This is ridiculous. I mean, this is downright ridiculous. This is ridiculous stuff. Jenny Lynn is saying they're the best phones, but the budget isn't there. Well, look, they've also banned them. There's a list of these phones, like the P20 Pro, we're not allowed to buy. They have banned them in the United States. This is ridiculous. It's ridiculous on a number of levels, which brings me to, did folks see Trump and Duda, right? Duda, the new president of Poland. He was at the White House. And I got to tell you, one thing that I can appreciate. Not many things I can totally appreciate about the Trump White House, but there's a few. One of them was the level of honesty in that meeting, right? Trump was meeting with Duda, and that was a business meeting. Trump was a realtor. He was like a realtor or a used car salesman, right? At one point, Trump is talking about how excited he is that he heard that maybe Poland would be buying more than 30 F-35 fighter jets. Now, I don't know what happened, but can you imagine, right? He's excited that he heard, so it's not set and done. He heard that Duda was going to buy 5 F-35 fighter jets. It's amazing. Oh my God, I'm so happy about it. He had an F-35 fighter jet fly over the White House on the sunny afternoon, and the president of Poland waved to the F-35 fighter jet. He's being a salesman for the military-industrial complex. It can't get more blatant than this. When he says that Jamal Khashoggi was probably killed by the Saudis, yeah, that was bad. But hey, I mean, we're selling him weapons. I mean, there's a level of honesty about the Trump administration that is refreshing, right? I mean, George W. Bush would have sold the Saudis weapons to defeat al-Qaeda and to defend democracy. But Trump is just like, yeah, we've got to make money, right? I mean, there's a blatant honesty that is better, I think, in a way, right? I mean, the people talk about the Obama administration. I know the folks at blackagendareport.com referred to the Obama administration as the more effective evil. I like that terminology because, in a way, it's true. The more strategic evil, perhaps. The Trump administration, right? I mean, he gets up there and he's like, I'm so excited. I am so excited. I have heard that President Duda is going to import 3 billion cubic meters of natural gas, liquefied natural gas, all the way to Poland. It's amazing. From the United States. Great stuff. It's amazing. And I mean, this is ridiculous. I mean, the fact that Poland, right, which does get a lot of liquefied natural gas from Russia, is going to import natural gas all the way, 3 billion cubic meters, all the way from the United States. I mean, you want to talk about wasteful spending, right? I mean, look at a map. Where is Russia? Where is Poland? Where's the United States? If Poland is willing to pay for the cost of taking natural gas from the USA all the way to Poland when they could get it from just over the border in Russia, yeah, that's pretty ridiculous. Now, Trump also praised the Baltic Pipe, right? And that's them trying to get more connected to Northern European countries and that's a different story. But there's this whole thing about diversifying energy, right? The fact that people buy natural gas from Russia, that's supposed to be evil or something. And again, it's just like Huawei. No one's supposed to buy their cell phone or their 5G technology from China. No one's supposed to buy their natural gas or oil from Russia. Everyone's just supposed to buy everything from the United States. And no matter how bad our products are, and no matter what price we're charging, everyone's supposed to just buy from us, right? Isn't that how the free market works? Isn't that what Milton Friedman wrote in Free to Choose? That the government should step in and make sure that companies based in certain companies have a monopoly. Isn't that Adam Smith's Wealth of Nations theory? Isn't that what it is? Isn't that Econ 101? Right? They stop believing this free market stuff the second they lose, right? They don't believe this stuff. I'm telling you, folks, the libertarians believe this stuff, right? The people, the people who listen to Thomas Wood's podcast and and are going to Liberty meetups and Liberty Hangout and those kind of people. Yeah, sure, they believe in it. They believe in it, but your average, you're not your average, but your elites of the United States, the ruling elite, the Wall Street monopolists, they stopped believing that stuff in like 1800. Okay. They love monopolies. They love government intervention. They just don't like it when it happens for average people, right? They don't like the government, giving people food stamps. They don't like the government giving people health care. But they do like the government making sure that no one can buy Huawei and they have to buy Apple, right? They don't like the government protecting labor unions and protecting the rights of workers on the job, but hey, they love it. They love it if the government can demand that, Poland import natural gas from the United States and buy less natural gas from Russia, right? They love having the government intervene on their behalf, right? Every capitalist loves having the government intervene on their behalf, which brings me to a point that really needs to be made. There's this thing that a lot of people, that are defenders of capitalism will say. Well, they say, what you're describing, Caleb, that's not real capitalism. That's crony capitalism. Ah, it's crony capitalism. Oh, that changes it, right? Real capitalism is this system where the government never intervenes and it's just a totally free market. Ah, yeah. Why didn't I think of that before? Oh, here's the problem. Every capitalist country that has ever existed has been a crony capitalist country. All capitalism is crony capitalism. All capitalism is crony capitalism. When wealth concentrates in the hands of a few people, they tend to use that wealth to influence government policy to make sure that wealth continues to concentrate in their hands. Right? I mean, I don't know what this real pure capitalism fantasy these people have it. So it's like the free market's going to operate. Some people are going to get rich and they're going to say, "Oh, I'm rich, but I will not bribe any politicians, and I will not try to influence the political process because I want to keep everything fair." And I mean, this is silliness. People that are rich and powerful use their wealth to influence the government so they can remain rich and powerful and become even more rich and powerful. It doesn't take a rocket scientist to figure this out, right? That you would have real capitalism for 2 seconds, right? And then as people as you have inequality, as some people own the means of production and enrich themselves, they would then use the government to protect their wealth. That's just every capitalism that we have seen has been crony capitalism. And so then, if they start that it's not real capitalism thing, then they can't play the card of, oh, well, look, your iPhone's made by capitalism. Well, no, apparently it's made by crony capitalism, right? No, you just said it's not real capitalism. Oh, you can't have a laptop, that's capitalism. Well, actually, no, you said it's not real capitalism. So isn't it crony capitalism? Your system hasn't made anything. Your system has never existed anywhere in the world, right? According to you, it's not real capitalism. So therefore, you have no right to invoke any of it. All the things that you try to credit capitalism for, well, it's not real capitalism. So either it's real capitalism and you have to be responsible for its problems, or it's not real capitalism and you don't get to invoke any of its successes. You have to have a clear definition when you're arguing with these people. I mean, you listen to Charlie Kirk or Ben Shapiro. It's, sometimes socialism is Vietnam, sometimes socialism is Pol Pot, sometimes socialism is China, sometimes socialism is France, sometimes the USA has problems because it's socialist, sometimes the USA is great because it's capitalist, sometimes China is doing really well because it's capitalist, sometimes China has its problems because it's socialist. Sometimes Norway and Sweden are not really socialist, and that's a myth, and they're actually capitalist, and sometimes Norway and Sweden are doing badly because they're socialist, and that's why refugees are coming there. They can't maintain a clear definition. If I were to ever debate one of these people, I would begin the debate by saying, this is what socialism is, this is what capitalism is. And at that point, and demand that my opponent do the same thing, right? I mean, you have to demand that your opponent do the same thing. They play fast and loose with it. It's capitalism when they like it, it's socialism when they don't. And, and they play, and it gets ridiculous, it gets really ridiculous. And it annoys me that they get away with this. No one steps in, no one argues with them. The argument in response to them is you're racist, or, what if we had worker cooperatives? It drives me up the wall. They say blatantly inaccurate things like, oh, cell phones were invented in capitalism, when in reality the first cell phone was invented in 1952 in the Soviet Union. But do you think that your campus Trotskyite is going to get up and say, well, the Soviet Union did it? No, because the first thing you learn when you're a Trotskyite is you always want to make sure that no one thinks you're like the bad kind of socialist, right? The first thing out of your mouth is, I'm not like Stalin. Oh boy. There we go. But hey, folks, I've got some other things to talk about. Oh boy, what a night. What a night, folks. I don't know what it is. Summertime, I'm tired all day, right? I'm tired all day, and it's like at night I wake up. At night I'm like a live wire. So here I am. It's summertime. We are getting to the warm months. It's been very nice weather here in New York City, but part of me is just kind of tired, and it's okay though, right? We live and learn. If you haven't tweeted this out yet, if you haven't invited people to join this conversation, now is the time to do it. Spread the word, bring people in. Um, we got so much to discuss here. I'm seeing comments from people. I know there's a lot of you watching now who aren't commenting. You all are lurkers, and I respect that. You can be a lurker. You can be a fan. You can be a hater. Shout out to Red Scare TV who's joining us. I talked earlier about something that was raised. But yeah, I'm having a great time here, right? It's a good evening. Plenty of things to talk about. Now, I wanted to mention. So people are seeing this interview where Trump has told that he was briefed by the Navy about UFOs, right? And then Trump says he doesn't believe in them, right? And this takes the cake. Because as we were talking about earlier in the live, I was talking about, how if you don't accept what Mike Pompeo says, that Iran attacked 2 oil tankers that were doing business with it, if you don't accept their narrative events, if you don't do that, right, you're a crazy conspiracy theorist. But hey, on CNN, it's a top story now. Trump's talking about UFOs, right? There you go. That used to be the thing that people would like mock. Like, I remember when I was doing journalism covering the trial of Cecily McMillan. I don't know if people remember that. There was an Occupy Wall Street protester who was charged and actually eventually convicted of assault on a police officer. I was in the courtroom. Her name was Cecily McMillan. And after she was convicted, the jury found her guilty. She ended up doing some prison time. The prosecutor, Amy Choi, gave a press conference where she said, the idea the police would ever attack a protester, that was just crazy. And the quote that stood out from the prosecutor was, "She might as well have been attacked by space aliens." Right? Space aliens. That's the favorite. That's like the favorite ridicule, right? That if you don't accept, right, if you think that the what is it? If you question, it's like, who did it? The space aliens, right? That's they're supposed to be the punchline, right? They're tinfoil hat. That's why the crazy guy is wearing a tinfoil hat. It's to keep the space aliens from being in his brain or something, right? That's the whole thing, right? That's the whole thing. That's the poster child for someone you don't take seriously is someone who believes in space aliens. However, someone who talks to the UFO crowd, the people who believe in space aliens, they are the poster child for people that are crazy, right? And they're the punchline. And it's funny, but that's acceptable, right? Mainstream media is running with Donald Trump talking about Navy UFOs and he doesn't believe, and Jimmy Carter, right? And Jimmy Carter, apparently, when he was running for president, he said, "I believe in UFOs. I'm a peanut farmer, and I believe in UFO." This is like, so UFOs, okay, but questioning whether or not Iran blew up 2 oil tankers for logical reason is not okay. It's really, really unbelievable, right? Now, the whole UFO thing, right? It was, when people, they like to talk about different sightings throughout history and all that, but it was 1946 that we get the UFO term, right? And there was even, I kid you not, you can look this up. There was I kid you not, I know this sounds hilarious. There was a gospel bluegrass song about flying saucers. You better pray to the Lord when you see those flying saucers. Could be the coming of the judgment day. There's a sign, there's a bow, there's a trouble. You can look it up. There is a country bluegrass gospel song about how the flying saucers are a sign that Jesus is about to return. Came out around that time. The term flying saucer, UFO, that's all like a post-World War II thing, right? And it became a part of U.S. culture around that time. And there was a lot of sci-fi movies about little green men, and you had the Twilight Zone TV show in the 50s, and you had The Day the Earth Stood Still, and it just became a thing. And you can almost wonder if this is like PTSD, right? World War II had just happened, the Cold War had started up. A lot of people, when the Cold War started, assumed it was just going to be another world war like that. The concept of the long Cold War hadn't really set in, and then there was the Korean War, which was an awful explosion of mass death on the Korean Peninsula. And there were a lot of people. You almost wonder if the whole UFO thing in the 50s, if that was on some level, if that was some kind of like PTSD from World War II or apocalyptic something, you wonder about that, right? Now, I figured, since I was going to mention the Trump comment on UFOs, and talk about, whatever, I thought I might mention, if you want to know how ridiculous, again, mainstream media, that's the punchline, right? It's, if someone says something, you're like, oh, and you're going to tell us about the space aliens, right? Right? That's supposed to be the most outrageous thing, but that's acceptable. But questioning the official story from the Pentagon is not. If you want to see a great example of that, in 2011, there was a book published called Area 51, and it was published by Annie Jacobsen. And Annie Jacobsen, who wrote this book, she actually went on The Daily Show to promote it. I mean, the book got reviews in a lot of places. It was a widely promoted book in 2011, Area 51. And if you want to talk about a nutty conspiracy theory, this book, published by, mainstream publishers, sold in American bookstores, promoted on, Jon Stewart of The Daily Show brought on his show the author of the book. This book claimed that the flying saucers and Area 51 was done by Stalin. Yes, I kid you not. Now, this obviously isn't the position of America's mainstream media, but this takes the cake. Annie Jacobsen was on there. They did a whole thing about how Stalin was flying little green men, and the little green men were midgets. You don't say that anymore. That's an offensive term. They were little people, were short individuals. They were from the Soviet Union, and the flying saucers were made by Stalin to try and fly into the United States. Now, if you want to talk about a crazy tinfoil hat conspiracy theory, right? But hey, the bad guy's Stalin, right? Stalin's bad. What, are you defending Stalin, Caleb? You're not defending Stalin, right? How dare you? I guess you're going to tell us that Stalin didn't kill a million gajillion people too, right? You're telling us Stalin didn't, take, short people, spray paint them green, put them in flying saucers, and fly them to the United States? What, are you a Stalin apologist, Caleb? You're not accepting that Stalin is responsible for UFOs and little green men? Yeah. No, I kid you not. On Jon Stewart, everyone was promoting. It was everywhere. It was widely promoted. You could buy it at Barnes & Noble. This book that said the little green men and the flying saucers came from Stalin. If you want to talk about, that whole thing, they've made this whole thing about conspiracy theory, right? If the mainstream media doesn't agree with it, it's a conspiracy theory. If you're telling me that Stalin invented flying saucers and bred short people and spray painted them green and flew them into the United States, and the U.S. government covered this up for reasons of national security and made people think that they were space aliens, that's a conspiracy theory if I've ever heard one. Good night. Seriously. The contents of that book that was so widely circulated, that is a conspiracy theory if I ever heard one. Goodness gracious. But apparently that's okay. That's part of the discourse. That's a legitimate talking point. That's Annie Jacobsen's theory. She, that's her beliefs. She's entitled to her belief. But if you don't agree that Iran blew up 2 oil tankers for absolutely no reason, then you're a crazy conspiracy theorist who needs to be silenced. This is American media. That's the double standard we're dealing with here. That's what we're dealing with, right? I mean, this is the world that we're living in, right? You know, Stalin breeding short little green men and flying them on saucers, cool. Oh, maybe Iran didn't attack. Shut up, you're a conspiracy theorist. Yeah, that's the situation we're in with American media, right? It's a light switch, like I said. You either accept the mainstream media line or you are a tinfoil hat conspiracy theorist. That's the only 2 choices. You can't have sensible criticism of the dominant narrative. You can't do it. Not allowed. Not gonna do it. Not gonna do it. Not gonna do it. Not gonna do it. What is that? Is it supposed to be George Herbert Walker Bush? I don't know. But hey, folks, I'm having a great time. Lula da Silva, right? I don't know if people saw, but at this point, Lula da Silva, the former president of Brazil, the socialist president of Brazil, from the Workers' Party, social democrat. I mean, he wasn't like Chavez and Maduro and Evo Morales. He was, middle of the road kind of guy. He is in prison for corruption. We now have a leaked conversation that took place on Telegram between the judge and the prosecutor. They were coordinating throughout the trial. That has been made public. Why is he still in jail? Right? Any other person, right? Any other country, I should say. If the judge is having a text conversation with the prosecutor to coordinate how to convict the person, that's a mistrial, right? That's prosecutorial misconduct. That's judicial misconduct. The person is out of jail like that. Why in the world is Lula da Silva still in prison? We now have a conversation between the prosecutor and the judge, coordinating their activities to try and lock him up. Right? And what makes it worse is that every single poll showed that if Lula da Silva had been allowed to run in the election, he would have beaten Bolsonaro. Bolsonaro would have lost, and Lula da Silva would be president. So they railroaded him to jail in a rigged trial to keep him from being elected. Right? Bolsonaro stole the election. That's basically what it looks like. Lula would have won the election, but he couldn't participate in the election because he was in jail for corruption. And the reason that he was convicted is because the judge and the prosecutor were in cahoots. Folks, why is Lula da Silva still in jail? I mean, these conversations. At one point, the prosecutor's kind of admitting to the judge, like, we don't really have much of a case here, right? I mean, Lula calls it a frame-up. I mean, look at the facts here, right? I mean, this was foul play if ever, right? Bernie Sanders has come out and called for Lula da Silva to be released. All kinds of people from around the world are saying, okay, at this point, according to any other legal system in the world, right? Any other system in the world, any other legal system in the world, at that point, they'd be released. So why in the world is Lula da Silva still in jail? I do not understand it, right? I mean, this is pretty crazy. They railroaded Bolsonaro into office. They railroaded Lula da Silva into jail. We've got the text conversation, and it's there. The facts are there. The facts are there, folks. It's overwhelming. Lula is a political prisoner, says Kinky. Lawfare, says Jenny Lynn, like warfare, except they're using the law to wage class war. That's what it looks like. I mean, that's what all the facts are pointing to. What a day. Right? But so much we can talk about here. Wow. I know Red Scare TV wanted me to mention that there was just a funeral for one of the founders of the Provisional Irish Republican Army, Bill McKay. And many people attended that. The Provosts are considered to be heroes in the Catholic neighborhoods of Northern Ireland. And if you wanna really, there's a lot of, I like Irish rebel music and all of that. But if you want to get an idea of what that kind of stuff was really like, see the movie Hunger. Right, that's about the hunger strike, 1981. That stuff was pretty ugly, folks. Bobby Sands starved himself to death along with a number of other Irish political prisoners. They're in their cells. They maintain their prisoners of war, fighting for Irish national liberation, so they're refusing to wear prison uniforms. So they're not allowed to wear any clothes. They strip off their outside clothes. They're refusing to put on prison uniforms. Because they're naked, the guards will not let them leave their cells because they're naked. So they're naked and they're forced to defecate and use the bathroom in their cells. Just awful stuff. The conditions are horrible. Near torture, what these guys were enduring. So they go on hunger strike, and one after another, they die. Just you want to talk about horrendous stuff. And Margaret Thatcher, who oversaw the whole thing, right? The whole thing, it was like one of these catch-22s, right? So Margaret Thatcher is saying that she will not grant them political prisoner status because there is no such thing as political murder, political armed robbery. These people are criminals. They are not activists. They are not soldiers. They are criminals, right? However, and this is the important thing to remember, even though Margaret Thatcher declared that there is no such thing as a political criminal or a political prisoner, these people are simply murderers, they have a special jail for them called the H Block, right? And they're getting special harsh treatment from the British legal system. So they're in a special prison facility where they get treated way worse than other prisoners. They're there with only other members of political resistance groups. And, you read about what went on with Bobby Sands and the Provosts, the Provisional Irish Republican Army. It was some pretty horrendous stuff. And, that stuff that went on, Joe McDonnell, and, those were pretty awful conditions. And, the Bobby Sands stuff. Watch the movie Hunger, right? Because it was not pretty. People like to, sing IRA music and stuff, but, look at the stuff that went on, in the 80s, 1981. It's pretty ugly stuff. It's an intense situation that went on. And, the fact, okay, so this founder of the Irish Provisional Army, Provisional Irish Republican Army, the Provost, the Provisional IRA, died. There were a lot of people who turned out to his funeral. His funeral was a big event. Why? Because those folks are considered to be heroes. You go to Northern Ireland, they've got murals of Bobby Sands, and James Connolly, and it's all there. Now, someone mentioned the Patriots game, which is that's a folk song. It's a folk song that was published, or it was a popular folk song. And it was accusing De Valera of selling out the Irish freedom struggle. And I believe it was written by Dominic Bahan, who was a communist folk singer. But it became popular, like the Clancy Brothers and others performed it. It's a popular Irish rebel ballad. If you want to look it up, I won't sing it now. I'll probably start crying. I don't want to start crying on my YouTube live. I don't want to get all emotional for you. But it's a beautiful piece of music. About the Irish freedom struggle and all of that. There's a lot of beautiful art there. You read about all that stuff that those folks have been through. It's really intense, heartbreaking stuff. One thing that I've used the Irish situation to make analogies for people before, because, when people talk about the Middle East in the United States, they get very weird. And you start saying like Sunni and Shia and all that, they start looking at you like they don't get it. You have to explain, right? In Ireland, right? You can never have entered a church in your entire life. But if you are from a certain neighborhood and you have a certain name, you're a Catholic. And in Ireland, you can never have entered a church in your entire life, but if you're from a certain neighborhood and you have a certain name, you're Protestant, right? And that's how the Middle East is. Sunni, Shia, Alawite, right? These kind of things are not, it's not a matter of these people sitting down and studying the various faiths of the world and picking their religion. That's not what's going on here, right? These are communities that have been around for thousands of years. And if you look at the way Shia Muslims are treated in Saudi Arabia, it's criminal. The U.S. testimony before the Congress of the United States has said that Saudi Arabia has religious apartheid. They have executed people for organizing peaceful protests. Their right to have routine religious services is denied. Children in Saudi schools, children who are Shia Muslim, their parents are Shia, they grow up as Shia, they have to learn in school that Shia Islam is a Jewish conspiracy against the king of Saudi Arabia, right? If you're a Shia Muslim in Saudi Arabia, you are only allowed to work in physical labor. They don't allow you to get any education so that you can do other work, right? The oil workers, right? The people, working the oil fields of Saudi Arabia. And they're Saudi citizens. They get some benefit, but they have gotten the short end of the stick. And again, it's not because they sat there and decided that Shia was the way to go. It's because they're from communities. It's thousands of years. The Shia community of Saudi Arabia, if you look at what the Saudis are doing in Yemen, right? Horrendous stuff. And again, it's the kind of thing that if you're living in New York City, the way religion is viewed, you might not get it, right? No one looks at me and says, that guy's a Protestant. I grew up as a Protestant. I consider myself to basically be a Protestant Christian. My wife is Roman Catholic. But no one looks at me and says, he's from that neighborhood. He looks this way. He has this name. He must be a Protestant. No one does that. That's just not how it works. Religion doesn't work like that in the United States, but in a lot of parts of the world, it's like that. And that's what I've used the Irish situation to point out before, right? And when people try to make the Irish national liberation struggle an issue of Catholics versus Protestants, they're completely missing the point, right? And I'm saying this as somebody who comes from Irish Protestants. Why do I have a French last name, right? I get that a lot, right? I'm a red-haired guy. My ethnicity is Irish, but why do I have a French last name? Well, my mother's last name is an Irish last name, but my father's family, also Irish Protestants who came to the United States, they were Irish Protestants, but if you go back a little bit further, they were Huguenots, right? In France, before the French Revolution, there was a group of French business owners, capitalists, merchants, I should say, mercantile capitalists in France, who didn't accept the Catholic Church and became Protestants, and they were forcibly expelled from France. So the British accepted them, except they didn't accept them in Britain. They sent them to Northern Ireland, and because they were Protestant, and because Britain was Protestant, they used the Huguenots as bullies, overseers to kick around the Irish Catholics, right? And so that's why a lot of Irish Protestants, like myself, have French last names. Maupin, or French is like Maupin, right? I have a French last name, even though I'm Irish, right? And that's true for a lot of Irish Protestants. And, it's funny, people say, you're Irish. Oh, right. You got cops and firemen in your family. You like to drink lots of whiskey. No, that's not me at all. You're from an urban area, right? Your family lives in Chicago or New York City, and, they've been there for 20 years, and you're in the Irish Association, and you got jobs in city government. No. That's Irish Catholic urban culture. That's totally different, right? My mother's family, they didn't drink at all. For generations back, they didn't believe alcohol was good. It violated. They were very fanatically dedicated to their Protestant religion. They didn't drink. My father's family, which, comes from the South of the United States, they drank alcohol, but they were rural folks. They were not urban folks. And this urban Irish Catholic thing, right? The St. Patrick's Day stuff, right? That's folks who immigrated 1900, 1920, 1930, and, cops, firemen, city government, that's one particular demographic. That's not me, right? I know my family comes from County Clare. That's my mother's family. I don't know what county my dad's family comes from, but, there you go, That's how these things work. The world is much more complicated. Here I'm rambling about my family history and all of that. What a day, folks. It's fun. It's fun. What else do people want to talk about? What's on people's minds? So we got a question about South Korea. We got a question about leprechauns. Here's an off-topic question. What do you think the world would have been better off if Germany won World War One? No? I mean, I don't know what kind of question that is. You know, when you start playing coulda, woulda, shoulda in history, I mean, who ultimately knows? However, what I will say about World War One is, you know, it's weird. If you go to Strand Bookstore in New York City, you go to their German history section, which I have done. This is the biggest bookstore in the world. No other bookstore in the world has as many books as Strand Bookstore has. Go to their German history section. They have got every book you ever wanted about Hitler. They've got Hitler's dog, and Hitler's niece, and Hitler's shoes, and Hitler's cousin, and Hitler's butler, and Hitler's girlfriend, and Hitler's Hitler, everything you ever wanted to know about Hitler. Hitler. They have got every Hitler book, you know, they've got Hitler Inside Out, Hitler, but ask about Germany in World War I, nothing, right? Ask about the German Revolution of 1918, 1919, it's like it didn't happen. The Weimar Republic, like it didn't happen. It's the most bizarre thing, right? World War I ended in Germany with a revolution. Bet you didn't know that. That's okay. I don't blame you. I'm not trying. You don't know that because, you know, on the History Channel, just like at the Strand Bookstore, it's Hitler. I don't ban my video for this, but you know, it's all Hitler all day long. But in 1918, as World War I was coming to an end, you know, there was already like an armistice on land, and the Kaiser of Germany went to the Navy and basically wanted them to do a suicide mission, right? And said to them, you know, just go and, you know, I'll die. And they wouldn't do it, right? And the soldiers, the sailors, they rose up. They shot their officers, they seized control of their Navy ships, and they said, we're not going to do it. We're done with this war. Shout out to Sharon Pitts. I appreciate the super chat. They said, we're not going to do it. They said, we're not going to do it. Right? And then the soldiers in Germany did the same thing. And workers in the factories laid down their tools. And German society ended World War I. I mean, there was already an armistice, but they ended the war by overthrowing the government. No one ever talks about this, right? The German Revolution of 1918, right? That at the end of World War I, they'd had it. And they rose up, and there was a Marxist uprising in Germany. That's how World War I ended. And then that Marxist revolution was betrayed by the Social Democrats. The Social Democratic Party, they got together, they had a constitutional convention, and the question was, Marxists had overthrown the German government. Would they write a socialist constitution or a capitalist constitution? And Ebhardt and Schneiderman and all the big German Social Democrats, they wrote the Weimar Constitution. They wrote a capitalist constitution, right? And Karl Kautsky, Karl Kautsky was like the Marxist back at that time. During the teens, he was like the most well-respected Marxist in the world. Nope, we're going to write a capitalist constitution, and if the people choose to vote for a socialist party, that's their business. They didn't write a socialist constitution. They did not create a socialist republic. Now, briefly, there was the Bavarian Soviet Republic, the uprising, and then Rosa Luxemburg and her Spartacus Bund. They had an uprising, a heroic uprising that took place. But, you know, World War I ended with a mass uprising. And the Marxist Party, the flagship Marxist party in the world, the German Social Democratic Party, came to power. And, you know, I mean, people don't quite get how significant this is. But, like, for example, Karl Marx wrote a pamphlet, Critique of the Goethe Program, where he's criticizing this socialist, you know, program, this socialist constitution, this program for a new socialist party that's been published. Well, the Goethe program was like the founding document of the German Social Democratic Party. The German Social Democratic Party had millions and millions and millions of members, right? It was a huge entity. And Frederick Engels, and it was the center of the global Marxist movement. It had millions of people, and they were leading trade union struggles. It was the Marxist party. And after World War I ended, they came to power. They had sold out their working class by supporting the war to begin with. But after, and there was the independent Social Democrats that had opposed the war. There was the Spartacus Bund of Rosa Luxemburg. World War I ended with the Germans bringing the Marxists to power. The flagship Marxist party, the Social Democratic Party of Germany, the party that Marx himself had a lot to do with establishing, the party that in its constitution hailed Karl Marx, as its ideological founder. German social democracy came to power and failed, and it didn't create socialism. And then, when Rosa Luxemburg and other people tried to keep socialism going and tried to keep fighting for socialism, they worked with the Freikorps, the free officers. Those were, right-wing German, soldiers and officers. They worked with them to kill them, right? Hitler was Freikorps, Ernst Röhm was Freikorps. All the big Nazis started out as Freikorps, and these were guys that were used by the Social Democrats, the German Marxist Party, to kill actual revolutionaries. And so when the German Social Democratic Party took power, didn't create socialism, and then killed the socialists and Marxists who actually wanted to continue the revolution and finish the revolution, when that happened, right, at that point, the idea that you were going to have communist revolution in Germany, it wasn't going to happen, right? The German Communist Party at that point, there's all these people who want to say it was Stalin's fault that Hitler got in power. No. At that point, they had their moment. In 1918, that was the time. The Marxists won. The revolution happened. The soldiers turned their guns around and refused to fight the war, and it didn't happen, right? And it didn't happen for a number of reasons. The main reason being labor aristocracy, right? That the German Social Democratic Party was dominated by these, higher paid workers, the skilled workers who identified with their bosses, right? The other reason was that the German Social Democratic Party was a huge machine under capitalism, right? They had choirs and sports leagues, they had kindergartens and, they ran all the trade unions and they had half the parliament, and they were such a big entity under capitalism that when it came time to take the risks that one would have to take, right, because it was, if you were going to write a socialist constitution, the capitalists would obviously be violent, and when it came time to take, the risks, they had so much to lose. Right? They built up such a big entity under capitalism that they lost their revolutionary boldness. And the German Social Democratic Party sold the revolution out. Right? The revolution happened, and they called it off. They prevented Germany from having socialism after its 1918 revolution. And at that point, something like Hitler was kind of inevitable, right? Because the left had tried. The German working class had gone out and fought and risked their lives and had a revolution to bring the German Social Democratic Party to power. And the German Social Democratic Party didn't want to take power. They didn't want it. They wrote a capitalist constitution, and all throughout the 20s, there were, little workers' uprisings, and you'd see the Social Democrats come together with the other mainstream parties in Germany to crush it. And eventually, you got the whole Hitler thing. The energy was on the right wing, right? The energy came from the right. At that point, the energy came from the right, right? The working class of Germany said, look, we gave the Marxists and the socialists, we gave you your chance. And they didn't just give them one chance, right? There was the 1918 revolution. There was other uprisings that happened in the 1920s, Brandler and the Marxists failed. And so Hitler and the far right came in because the left had failed. And that was why you had, the rise of Nazism, right? And that's what a lot of people don't get, right? And that, I mean, it's amazing. How is it possible that there was a whole revolution in Germany in 1918 and barely anyone knows about it, right? I mean, that shows how they've done a number on us. But you couldn't have had Hitler without having the failure of the German Revolution, right? Yeah, if I mean, you couldn't. I mean, all of that. I mean, the 1920s and Berlin and all of that. I mean, and if you read, some art reflects this, right? If you watch, like, I know, like Cabaret, the musical, they hint at some of this, right? You can watch some movies, some of these Hitler documentaries, they have to kind of talk about this, but they don't. I mean, and they don't go over this, right? And that fascism won because the left failed, right? Again, you know what I mean? Again, that's like a key point. It wasn't creeping fascism. It wasn't like the right wing just gradually got more right wing. Because the left took power, fell on its face, and so the right wing picked up the pieces. That's what happened, and nobody talks about that. And you can't talk about German history without talking about that. Which then leads me to somebody asked about Strasserism. So I'll talk about it, right? Gregor Strasser and Otto Strasser were two German guys. They were right-wing Germans. They were Freikorps. They killed a lot of communists. They were right-wing German activists. And they had a right-wing paramilitary organization, and they eventually merged into the Nazi Party. And they controlled it on a regional level, I guess. I forget, it was either the North or the South or something. They had a big faction in the Nazi Party. And unlike Hitler, I guess, they took the socialism part of National Socialism a little more seriously. They were anti-communist, they hated Marxism, they killed lots of communists and all that, but they argued basically that the Nazi ideology was opposed to capitalism, right? And they were anti-Semitic, wildly anti-Semitic, but they still held on to, they believed in, nationalizing industries and such. And I believe while they were opposed to communists, they hated the Communist Party, they hated Marxism and all that, they did actually favor aligning Germany with the Soviet Union against Britain and France, and against the United States. And they took that position. They were, it was Gregor Strasser, Ernst Röhm, and it was a political faction. And, I mean, you read their writings, they're raving anti-Semites, they're racists, they're bragging about all the communists they killed, they're hateful, they're bigoted, they're awful people. But the economics, were different, right? As Hitler was coming to power, he moved more and more pro-free market, right? I mean, he started saying things to the effect of National Socialism just means that as long as corporations are patriotic, we don't have a problem with them. And the Strasserists were holding on to some of the economic populism that had defined the Nazis in their early days. And then, and the Strasserists were very big among what you called the brown shirts. And the brown shirts were the SA, the stormtroopers, right? The street fighting group. And they were big among them. And then when Hitler took power, after he'd been in power for a little while, these stormtroopers, the street fighting Nazi groups that went around beating people up and, and fighting communists and attacking Jews on the street and committing hate crimes and, right, these rather violent street thugs, they became a little bit of a problem for the Nazi government. Because at that point, they were trying to run a government. They were not trying to seize power. They were no longer a street fighting movement. They were actually a government. And there was also a fear that they were very unsatisfied with Hitler. A lot of the street fighting, they thought Hitler had kind of sold out. So Hitler purged them all, and he killed them on the Night of the Long Knives. And Gregor Strasser, not Otto Strasser, Gregor Strasser was killed on the Night of the Long Knives. Ernst Röhm, who was the head of the SA, the brown shirts, he was executed on the Night of the Long Knives. And what was interesting is that Ernst Röhm was gay. He was openly homosexual, and he made no secret about it. It was not a secret whatever. I mean, he was out there. I'm gay. He had a gay partner, and he was a gay Nazi, and It wasn't a thing. Afterwards, the Nazis, after the Night of the Long Knives, the Nazis made a big point of, putting gays in concentration camps and saying they were anti-gay. But this guy who was with the Nazis at the beginning, Ernst Rem, he was the gay Nazi, and everyone was okay with it. And there was a weird, the German Communist Party wanted to legalize homosexuality, but there was a weird level of kind of, they felt that homosexuality was bourgeois decadence. And there was this weird middle class strata of young gay men who joined the Nazis during that time because they thought the Nazis were more mystical and they liked ancient Greece. And it was a weird thing that before the Nazis came to power, there was like a gay Nazi current or something, right? And that was Ernst Rem comes out of that. I'll tell you one of the weirdest things is Ernst Rem, awful human being. You read his autobiography. He just goes on and on and on for pages. All the communists he's killed. It's blood and gore and anti-communism, and it's awful. But there's this weird, and it's the weirdest thing, because Hitler killed him early on, and because he was gay, there's all these weird academics who want to make him somehow into a good guy. I kid you not. It's the weirdest thing. There's this odd sympathy with him among liberal academics. They want to make it sound like somehow Ernst Rem was a good, he was gay and he was more into the socialism part of that. No, he wasn't. I mean, he was just an awful human being. Ernst Rem, he was the head of the stormtroopers, for goodness sakes. This was a guy who was on the streets killing people and committing crime. I mean, and Hitler killed him because he wanted to calm things down so he could stay in power. He didn't want the whole country to fall apart. It's a weird thing. A lot of these liberal academics have a crush on Ernst Rem because he was gay. I mean, that shows how weird identity politics has gotten. When Ernst Rem, one of these murderous, brutal Nazis, is, well, people try to make him out, Hitler killed. No, he was, I mean, so there you go. People wanted to ask me about Strasserism. I answered that question. I don't like to talk about the Nazi stuff too much, but it's a fair question, and that stuff is out there. I mean, what is it, right? And that now Strasserist has become a slur of these stupid people on the internet. If you're a leftist and you criticize identity politics, Strasserist, right? If you are a leftist and you suggest that maybe Hillary Clinton, maybe Trump was better than Hillary Clinton, Strasserist, it's like a slur. It has no meaning. There is nobody in the world that I know of who likes Strasser, right? I don't know of any Strasserite organization that exists currently. I mean, I think there's like 2 books of his writings on Amazon or something. I researched this stuff because I was seeing this on the left book, right? The left book crowd was Strasser. It's a big thing. You look it up. It's not really a thing. It's really not a thing, right? I guess there are neo-Nazis around the world who, like, they go through a Strasserist phase or something, but it's not a thing. It's not a thing, okay? It's not a thing. It's a slur that somebody who doesn't get out much and doesn't like somebody on the internet decided to start calling people, and it caught on. That's all Strasserism is. That's Strasserism. Not much to it, really. It's kind of gross stuff. But anyway, folks, yeah. And that's, somebody asked me what Nazbol was. Why don't we just cover that? We're covering all the bad words, right? So Nazbol, what is Nazbol? Well, there was a political party in Russia in like the late 90s called the National Bolsheviks. Doesn't exist anymore. That's about it. I mean, it doesn't exist. It no longer exists. And it was a political party, and they were Russian nationalists, and they were also Bolsheviks. They invoked the history of the Russian Revolution, but they also fitted into Russian nationalism. And they actually traced their heritage, interestingly. They invoked a faction in the German Communist Party that was expelled. There was a faction in the German Communist Party that argued that because Germany was being forced to pay war reparations and was being mistreated by French and American corporations and stuff, that the German Communist Party should make a nationalistic appeal to the German working class. And they were kicked out of the German Communist Party for arguing that. Bukharin was probably, I think Bukharin was largely involved in calling them out. It was similar to how they accused this guy Jay Lovestone in the United States of American exceptionalism. Jay Lovestone was a leader of the American Communist Party who said that Karl Marx's theories didn't apply to the United States, that the USA was exceptional, right? And they kicked him out for American exceptionalism. And what's hilarious is now that's a term, American exceptional. It's like a good thing. Well, there you go. So there was the national Bolsheviks that were kicked out of the German Communist Party because they argued that the German working class should have a nationalist appeal. That's all that there is to that. Not much there, folks. Again, and it's not a thing, right? And you see people on the internet, this person's a Nazbol. Well, no, they're not. They're not a member of a political party that doesn't exist anymore. So it's just a silly thing. There's a lot of people that, it's what's sad is that kind of liberal postmodern politics has become so powerful in leftist circles that those who try to hold on to class struggle, socialism, what the left used to be all about, they get targeted, right? It's a very nasty attack that goes on where they try to silence people. And they try to, anyone who doesn't call for the overthrow of the Syrian government, right? Well, Assad, the Syrian government, the Ba'athist Arab Socialist government, where the Communist Party has seats, where they have trade unions in the factories. Well, no, Syria is fascist. If you support it, well, then you're not a leftist, you're a fascist. Well, no, Syria is not fascist. It's a Ba'athist Arab Socialist left-wing government. But if you support it, you're a fascist, so you shouldn't be allowed in left-wing circles because you're a fascist. I mean, it's just, it's the atmosphere that has taken over in the left, and it's very scary. It really is, right? It used to be the left that opposed the wars, but now all the governments that we fight, that the U.S. government goes after, they're all accused of being racist, sexist, and homophobic, so therefore if you support it, you're, that's how things have gone, and it's this atmosphere that has been created, and it's really, really a tragedy. I was going to make a point about postmodernism because it's gotten to be really, really ridiculous. But, I was thinking about this the other day. The term white privilege, it gets traced back to Noel Ignatin. And Noel Ignatin was a Maoist communist in West Virginia. And he'd been in the Communist Party. He'd broken with them. He was more pro-Stalin, pro-Mao. And he wrote this book, White Blind Spot. And he basically argued that workers in the United States, even though they're workers, even though they're exploited, they have white privilege. And that's where the term comes from. It's a communist term. And the funny thing is now that that most of the people espousing white privilege, the term white privilege, most people espousing that term don't really believe in Marxism, right? They don't believe that workers that are white are oppressed. They use it to mean that white workers have it too good. They have a privilege. A privilege is something you're not entitled to, right? Right? A privilege is not a right, right? If you believe that people have the right to a job, then the fact that it's easier for you to get a job if you're white is not a privilege. Right? What it means is that people of color, because they're being discriminated against, because they're facing discrimination, that their rights are being violated. However, if it's not an issue of people of color's rights being violated and racism, if it's an issue of white privilege, what you're subtly saying, and this is the best criticism I've ever heard of the term, what you're subtly saying at that point is you're saying that those white workers should have more difficulty finding a job. You're saying that having a job is not a right, it's a privilege. And the fact that it's easier for a white person to get a job, which it is, then you're saying that it should be worse for the white person to get a job. That's not what the left preached, right? Leftism, Marxism, socialism is about solidarity. It was about raising everyone up, starting with those who needed it the most, right? And privilege politics doesn't think that. Privilege politics is something that someone's not entitled to. And when you start talking about white privilege, you're basically saying that members of the working class in the United States should have it worse, right? Members of the working class who are male, members of the working class who are, not transgender, members of the working class who are white, that they should have it worse because they have this privilege that they're not entitled to. That's scary stuff. I mean, think about it, right? I mean, it used to be the left has always opposed racism, right? The Communist Party, they were opposing Jim Crow segregation and organizing against it from the beginning. I mean, but now we have this formulation, which it began, and Noel Ignatin wouldn't think that. And that's the weird thing, is like if you read Noel Ignatin, White Blind Spot, he's saying that white blind spot, he's basically arguing that white privilege is that because workers in the United States are white, they have some benefits that other workers don't have, and that has caused them to be more conservative and not interested in class struggle. That's what he's basically arguing, and he's observing this as a white worker living in West Virginia. But that concept, which originated among Maoist communists, has been picked up by liberals, and it has totally been turned on its head. It's not what it means, right? I don't think Noel Ignatin was arguing that those West Virginia coal miners who were white had it too good and should be worse off. That's not what he was arguing. He wasn't arguing that at all. He was just saying that they have a white blind spot, that they have some benefits, some privileges because they're white, and that causes them to not have the solidarity, and it's something we should think about. And it's weird how, it's kind of like the term American exceptionalism. The Communist Party kicks out Jay Lovestone for American exceptionalism, right? And so then now American exceptionalism is a big thing. It's very weird how, communists talk among themselves and they use a term, and then that term gets picked up by the wider society, and then they use it to mean something completely different. It's fascinating, I think. I think it's fascinating, but it's also disturbing in a way. I've been going for quite a while here. I'm probably going to wind it down in a little bit, but what else is on people's minds? We're doing great tonight. I know a lot of you are here. We have got so many things we can talk about, but I'm going to wind it down because it's well past 1 in the morning. Elizabeth Warren is a self-proclaimed American exceptionalist. Well, there you go. Right. It was a derogatory term, but, there you go. Someone's asking me about the Ba'ath Party in Syria. It's a political party founded by Michel Aflaq. There's another individual. I don't want to get too much into that. A friend of mine gave a pretty good class on the history of Ba'athist Arab socialism. It's on Flame of Liberation YouTube channel. Don't agree necessarily with everything in the video when he talks about the Iraq-Iran war, but it's very good in going over the history of Ba'athist Arab socialism. Good friend of mine made that presentation. Do you think Ben Shapiro will ever accept your challenge, says Ramiro? I hope he will, but I have a feeling he won't. Like I said, I feel like I'm very much, because I'm espousing Marxism, I'm very much, I'm not a liberal college kid calling him racist. I'm somebody who has answers to his questions, and I'm the kind of thing that keeps them up late at night. I'm what they're afraid of. Because we all know that the reason that European social democracy came into being, you would not have had European social democratic welfare states. Norway and Sweden, they didn't exist because of social democrats. They existed because of communists. Social democrats came to power and implemented all these progressive reforms because communists were there, because of the Soviet Union, because of the role that communists played during the Second World War, because there were big communist parties in almost every European country. Social democrats came to power and granted concessions, like free healthcare, like guaranteed employment, like free education, because there was the fear of communist revolution. Just like you couldn't have had Dr. Martin Luther King without Malcolm X, right? It was the fear of Malcolm X and black nationalism that allowed Martin Luther King to come into being and be accepted by certain wings of the Democratic Party and the establishment. That social democracy, these people who want to say, we don't need communism. Communism is scary. Marx and Lenin, and that's scary stuff. But social democracy is good. Social democracy only had the oomph it had in the Cold War era because of communism. If there was not fear of communist revolution, if there was not a huge communist party in France, a huge communist party in Norway, a huge communist party in Sweden, a huge communist party in Britain, you wouldn't have guaranteed healthcare. You wouldn't have guaranteed education. Social democracy was the result of the fear of communism. They granted power to the Social Democrats. They let the Social Democrats do their thing. Wings of the ruling class in Norway and Sweden, billionaires and millionaires, funded and promoted social democracy as an alternative to communism. That's, social democracy, you would not have Norway and Sweden if you did not have, the Soviet Union. and a huge communist party, and that these things walk together. These things don't exist in a vacuum. You watch the Michael Moore movie, Where Do We Invade Next? I think it was like a Michael Moore movie where he's talking about the greatness of these European welfare states. And what these folks are missing is that these European welfare states were the result of historical circumstances in which there were huge communist parties, huge levels of communist activism, and as a result of that, social democrats were brought forward, right? You couldn't have had Martin Luther King Jr. without Malcolm X. You couldn't have had European social democracy without communism. And you'll notice that since the 1990s, European social democracy has been on the defensive. And now you'll notice that there's been a huge amount of neoliberal reforms in a lot of these countries, and that the refugee crisis is spurning that, and that's a big factor. And you'll also notice that one of the things that has enabled European social democracy, and this is very odd, and it's going to be odd to say this, is nationalism. I know, that sounds really odd, right? That sounds, they're anti-nationalists, they're internationalists, it's these right-wing populists that are nationalists. Well, I'm telling you, right, in the United States, part of the reason that we've always, we've never had the level of social democratic welfare programs that they have in Europe and countries like Sweden and Norway and France and Germany is because of racism. And because of, the United States isn't a nation, right? In France, French people have voted to have food for low-income French people because in their mind, they're French people just like me, and they're hungry, and I want them to be fed. In the United States, the reason that so many people oppose social democratic programs is because they have got it in their head that if they vote to give food to low-income Americans, they're giving it to low-income Americans of another race who are lazy. And I tell you, I kid you not, right? The welfare mother, right? There's the whole racist trope. Everyone thinks of a black person when you say welfare mother. It's a racist thing that it's been ingrained in our culture. And so many white working class people who would want to help a low-income white person like themselves, they vote against social programs because they think, I don't want my money to go for some, person of color. The race aspect of the welfare social democratic stuff is big. You can't ignore it, right? The fact that many people of color are low income, the rate of people that are low income among people of color and the rate of people that are low income among whites, there's a difference there. So by portraying poverty and people who receive social benefits like food stamps, like unemployment benefit, by portraying the people that receive social benefits as being people of color, many white people who would be for it are against it because they think, oh, this is going to the others. It's not going to people like from people in my neighborhood, people I might know who are suffering. It's going to those other ones. That's racism. But it's also the fact that we're not a nation in the United States. It's also the fact that there's not one United States nation and culture, so you don't have the level of solidarity. And when people are able to other others, they don't want to help the others. They want to help people I think are like them. They don't want to help others, and that's a big problem, and you can't ignore that. And that was what was missing from Michael Moore's Where to Invade Next movie as well, is he kind of missed the point that in France, where you have this French national culture, we're all French. Sure, people they vote to feed other French people, but in the United States, they've always been able to do the racism thing where, hey, we don't want food stamps. That's feeding. It's a fact. It needs to be said, and you can't ignore that. And that's why the race issue is so important. That's why opposing racism is so important. But it's also why, you can't ignore it. And that's why at this moment that there's a huge wave of refugees pouring into Europe, you see a rolling back of the welfare state. Because now people who would have voted for, programs are saying, no, it's going to these other people that are coming into my country that speak a different language, that have a different religion, because there is now some others, all of a sudden, the willingness to provide social welfare isn't there, and they're able to push neoliberalism. It's tricky how this works, right? Now, all of a sudden, you get a lot of these people in Finland and, Norway and places like that who were all for social programs when it was going to people like them, But when you have a wave of people from Syria and Afghanistan who are coming into the country, all of a sudden they're like, I don't want to pay for stuff for them. It's this issue of nationality, this issue of, it's complicated, right? And and it's weird. You have German political figures, Sarah Wagenknecht, I believe. This is a German leftist, like an anarcho-communist or something, but she said something to the effect of, this refugee stuff isn't sustainable, and she was pied in the face by anarchists. How dare she? But she was simply saying that, look, and I've said it before, I've got a whole rant on immigration, that we should oppose, I'm not in favor of tighter restrictions on immigrants. I'm not, right? I'm not in favor of what Trump is doing, and the attacks on immigrants are completely unacceptable. But there's a problem there. And the left liberal, I should say, the liberal response to the problem, which is just, hey, immigration is great, this is the American dream, is not the answer. There's a big problem that needs to be addressed. There are millions of people who can't stay in their homeland, who are fleeing, right? There are dead bodies every day along the border with Mexico. And no, that's not because the United States is just so amazing. People just want to die to get here so bad. No, it's because people are fleeing things that are so bad that they're risking their lives to get away from them. And people are drowning in the Mediterranean on rafts coming into Europe from Libya, since Libya has been bombed to shreds. People are fleeing Syria. And it's not just wars. The people are, people from the Philippines who can't find work are going to the Middle East to live as guest workers, slaves in places like Saudi Arabia. When I was in the United Arab Emirates in the airport, I noticed that all the airport workers spoke English, but with a Filipino accent. They're Filipinos, low-income Filipinos. They need a job, so they go to United Arab Emirates to live as guest workers, slaves with no rights, to get tortured and deported if they do anything wrong, or anything that goes against the rules they follow. There's a big problem. The mass migration issue is a big, big problem, and it's facing the entire global community. And this automation stuff is only going to make it worse. The computer revolution is going to make it even more and more of a problem. It's a problem of global capitalism, and you cannot just say, woo, welcome to the refugees. No borders in the workers' struggle. Open borders now. Come on, people. We have to address the fact that there's a problem. There's a problem, and we have to have an intellectual conversation with people about it. You have to talk to people frankly. You have to be like, we have a problem. On a global level, we have a problem, right? The global economy is producing millions of people who have no place at the assembly line. People are fleeing their homelands, drugs, terrorism. We have to have a conversation about the problem. And if you can't have a conversation about the problem, right? Anti-intellectualism and movementism, I should call it. I don't even want to call it anti-intellectualism, because intellectuals, right, that's the whole, that's Irving Kristol and Bert Cochran, and they're writing their, I'm not defending the intellectual strata. But, movementism, which is a big problem in left-wing circles, right? We don't care about facts. We just want to have rallies. Woo! Whatever the liberals are saying, we go along with that. Yeah, in left-wing circles, there's a lack of interest in ideology, and there's this kind of like, hey, the liberals, CNN's calling a Black Lives Matter rally. Let's go to that, right? It's on CNN. It's the cool thing to do today. Woo! Right? Tailism, movementism is a big problem, because if you just go along with what the ruling class is saying, how are you being a socialist? Right? If CNN, anyone who advocates socialism, if at any point CNN says what they say, they should do a double take and go, wait a second, because CNN is the voice of Wall Street imperialism. So if the main voice of mainstream American media is saying what you're saying, you should do a double take there. That doesn't mean, in some cases, right, facts are facts. That doesn't mean you shouldn't say it just because CNN says it. I'm definitely not saying that. But if you sound like CNN, if you're echoing CNN, anyone who considers themselves to be a socialist or progressive should go, ooh, think for a moment. But a lot of people don't get that. I'll just tell you, a lot of people don't get that. A lot of people I met, and I think it's the curse of the 1960s. A lot of these are old baby boomer radicals, and hey, when they were marching against the Vietnam War, the Beatles were on TV telling them to do it, and all the anti-war songs were on the radio, and I mean, it's the curse of the baby boomer leftist generation, whatever, but movementism is a big problem. I'll tell you that. That get out of the movement and get to the masses. The protest cage is a very, very small, isolated section of U.S. society. We need to get to average people and get them to understand that capitalism and the rule of profits is destroying their lives. And we need a government of action to fight for working families. We need a government of action to fight for working families. I've raised this slogan again, and I will repeat it again. This slogan should be everywhere. This is what Americans need to understand. We need a government of action to fight for working families. We need a government of action to fight for working families. We need a government of action to fight for working families. We need a government of action to fight for working families. This slogan should be everywhere. The neoliberalism, the economic theories of Milton Friedman and Friedrich von Hayek have said, hey, the government's the best that governs least, hands off. No. We need a government of action that then takes action to fight for working families. Where are the Huey Longs of the 21st century? Right? Where are the political leaders who start fighting their own class and mobilizing the working class? Right? When will figures emerge in U.S. politics who aren't afraid to call the people out into motion, to organize people, to build centers of community and power, right? It's only a matter of time, folks. I'm excited about a lot of things I'm seeing. I love to talk to people in the Bernie movement. They're great folks. They're not where I'm at politically necessarily, but I like them. Where are the, folks in the Tulsi movement are good too. I like to talk to them. I obviously don't agree with them on a lot of points. I did a whole video interviewing Andrew Yang supporters. A lot of great folks supporting Andrew Yang. There's a lot of people in this country who want to take action. They see all the problems we have, all these ugly wars, the opioids, the rising police state, the driving down of living standards, and they want to do something about it. And we need a government of action. We need figures like Roosevelt, figures that will come in there and say, you know what, I'm a political leader, and I am going to call the people out. And I'm going to put these people that want to be mobilized. There's so many people that are sitting there right now as I'm saying this, saying, I want to do something. Give me something to do. Make me part of it. I want to do something to help my country. And we need a government of action that will push all of those people into motion to rescue the country. We need a government of action to fight for working families. We need a government of action to fight for working families. I'm not endorsing any candidate. I have my criticisms of every Democratic Party candidate. I've got my criticisms of them. I've got my criticisms of Trump. I'm not endorsing any candidate. I'm just telling you the way we're going to get out of this is with a government of action. When the government starts taking action to fight for average working class people, when there is a government that draws its strength from pushing people into action, right? When political figures emerge, think about 1936. Roosevelt was reelected President of the United States, even though the majority of the rich and powerful in the country didn't support him. Wall Street was all against him. He said never before have they been so united against a president, but he welcomed their hatred. He won the 1936 election, and immediately, after the 1936 election, you had all these employers laying people off, saying, oh, look, Roosevelt's back in office, and you had mass layoffs, basically to punish the working class for voting for Roosevelt. And in response to that, Roosevelt, the president of the United States, said to the working class that they had the right to occupy their factories. Right? And when workers went on strike in Flint, Michigan, he sent the military to protect the strikers from the local police and from the militias. Right? And Roosevelt basically, you had the man in the White House, a man in the White House, urging people in the United States to occupy their factories, to rise up and fight for their employers, to build unions. It was a huge explosion of working class power, the rise of the CIO, because you had a government of action, right? Roosevelt was facing, an insurgency from Henry Ford and Henry Morgan and the right-wingers who wanted to remove him from office. So in order to maintain power, President Roosevelt turned to the working class and said, go get them. Seize your factory. Occupy your factory. Sit down. Occupy your factory. And he lined himself up with the occupying movement, with the sit-down strikers, with the Communist Party. That was who was doing it. The CIO, everybody knew that was the Communist Party, right? Right? That was the Communist Party USA that was organizing the CIO, right? That was William Z. Foster. That was Gus Hall, the young Gus Hall in Youngstown, Ohio. The CIO, Roosevelt, because of his own reasons, as a Bonapartist figure, strategically told the Communist Party and the CIO labor unions, go occupy your factories, go fight back, right? There's a famous story of a textile worker, right? A textile worker in South Carolina who met President Roosevelt, shook his hand, and he said, you're the first man in the White House to know that my boss is a son of a bitch, right? I don't swear very often, but that's the quote. He said, I'm going to vote for you, Roosevelt, because you're the first man in the White House who knows that my boss is a son of a bitch, right? I mean, that was Roosevelt. Roosevelt was a Bonapartist. He was a progressive Bonapartist, and he was strategically aligned with the Communist Party, basically to beat back fascist coup attempts against him in the 1933 business plot to remove him. And, it was, in order to hold on to power, he entered a popular front, a strategic alliance with the communists. And there you go. I mean, that kind of thing. That's when positive things start happening. When political leaders align themselves with mass movements. And not with people in protest cages, not with, hippies, but with people that have roots in the community. And Roosevelt did what he did. Bernie Sanders talks about Roosevelt, praises him for the good things he did. He did all of that because he was aligned with communists, right? Roosevelt, he had members of the CIO over at the White House. He had Gilbert Green, the head of the Young Communist League, was slept over at the White House at one point. Slept over when he was being questioned by communists, right? Not questioned by communists, questioned by Congress, by the Congressional Committee. When the Congressional Committee called Gilbert Green to testify about the National Youth Congress and being a communist, Eleanor Roosevelt and FDR, they let him sleep over to make a statement. Communists slept over at the White House, right? And then FDR, he had the falling out with the communists over the Stalin, or the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact, the Pact of 39, and it's complicated. Roosevelt wasn't a communist. He was certainly not a communist. But he was a Bonapartist figure who entered a strategic alliance with communists in order to do a lot of good things. And in the final years of his life, he was talking about an economic Bill of Rights, and there's a good chance he could have been, if he had lived, and if the class struggle had escalated. I mean, Roosevelt didn't believe in the Cold War. He didn't favor a Cold War. He favored a continued alliance with the Soviet Union. He died right as the Second World War was starting to move toward ending. And, who knows what could have happened if he had lived, right? But at the end of the day, he wasn't a communist. He was a Bonapartist. He took a lot of progressive reforms. He aligned himself with the Communist Party, with the CIO, with the Socialist Party, with the progressive groups. He saw them as his allies, and he did a lot of good things, right? He was a Bonapartist figure. And that strategic alliances within the ruling class are very key. And I've emphasized that. And there's this romanticism, class independence, class for itself, and they kind of miss the point, right? They really do. And that it's, there's a lot of this break with the Democratic Party, and they're not realizing that, the strategic alliance that Marxists had with Abraham Lincoln to defeat slavery and the Republicans, the strategic alliance that Marxists had with Roosevelt. This stuff is important stuff, and people overlook it. And that people that just want to scream class for itself, class independence, never align with nobody. I'm for the working class. That's juvenility, right? That revolutions don't drop from the sky. They don't grow on trees. And they certainly don't come about as a result of adventurous, crazy violence. They come about as a result of real conditions that take place. I gave a class called The Actual Nature of Revolution. It's on YouTube, quite a few views. Check it out if you haven't seen it. I talk about the Russian Revolution. I talk about Bolivarianism, right? That revolutions, the actual nature of revolution, is rooted in divisions in the ruling class. And Lenin actually spells this out. He talks about how when the ruling class is divided among itself. This is something that real revolutionaries have always understood, that strategic alliances and Bonapartism and all that stuff is very, very key. And this, that if you just want to scream all day that you hate the whole ruling class and you want to overthrow them, you have graduated from communist kindergarten. But it's not that simple. Right, the class struggle is very complicated. Anyway, it is late, folks. It's 1:34 a.m. I'm exhausted, but I had a great time. I think we talked about a lot of good stuff. There's a lot of you here. Wow, the numbers have just been rising all night. Remember, folks, we are a family here. We're a community. And what we're doing here is very, very special. And you don't get this on other lives. I don't know of anyone else on YouTube who talks the way I do, right? Compare me to other lefty YouTube channels out there. There's nothing like this. This is unique. I'm having a great time. So are you. I love you all. We're a community here. Let's stay strong. Let's do what we got to do. Keep spreading the word. I've got a new book that will be out soon. I'm thinking July 5th will be the day that it'll be released. That's what it's starting to look like now. It's taking a little bit longer because of some publication details, but my new book is coming out. You're all going to love the new book. You're going to love the new book. You guys are going to like this. You will like this. If you're one of the people that follows my work, this book that's coming out, don't want to give away too much about it. You're going to love it. You're really going to love it. But it's an exciting time, folks. I worry about the future of the country. I love everyone on the world. But I also love the people of my country. I'm an American. I'm from the United States, and I worry about our future, right? I see Russia and China rising and industrializing, but I worry about us because, we're facing some big difficulties here. And, I feel like as much as people don't like Trump, he's just the beginning. We're facing a crisis of capitalism, and only people like us, working class people, are going to be the way out, right? We're going to have to build our own way out. We are going to have to take history into our own hands. By caring for people and by building community and by spreading the ideas that are so, so important. I love you all. We're just doing the best we can. So have a good day. Have a good week. Have a good night. I'll be back. I'm going to keep doing what I'm doing. You can keep doing what you're doing. Stay strong. Best wishes.